Buongiorno. Avete dormito bene?
Donc 30 minutes et 10 minutes. Donc si je prends 5 minutes, 3 minutes. Then it's less for you and it's not good. It's not good. It will be a trace that, it's good to listen to it. Otherwise I don't really know much. Okay.
Good morning. Welcome back, all of you. And I will be very, very brief because we're already a bit late. And Monsignor Braschi pointed out that, we're on a tight schedule, also for pranzo. So, welcome back to this second day of our wonderful DS. On envisioning and representing Africa. So our second session, the first session of today, is dedicated to biographies. And I'm not going to introduce that because Eileen did that wonderfully yesterday. Just going to briefly introduce our first speaker, so Nafisa Valieva, sitting over there. And so she's graduated from Saint-Ichon Orthodox University in ancient languages of the Christian Orient with a focus on Amharic and Ge'ez languages. She wrote a PhD on Gadla Lālibalā, I hope I'm pronouncing it well, its tradition and documentation at the University of Hamburg under the supervision of Alessandro Bausi and Marie-Laure de Rat. Her interest lay in Ge'ez written sources about the medieval period, and since 2021 she also works at Collège de France on a critical edition of the Gadla Lālibalā collection. I hope I'm right, I hope so. And I'll leave it to you, and all speakers have 30 minutes, not a minute more, and 10 minutes for debate and questions and answer. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Can you hear me well, like this? I'm honored to present to this occasion a piece of my research, reading the Life of Lālibalā, Gadla Lālibalā, as a biography and a portrait of Ethiopian society. Gadla literally means struggle, is a literary form which falls into category hagiography, if we understand it not as a distinct genre opposing to other genres, hagiographic versus historic, like it was understood in the 19th century when the term was introduced first, but rather simply as a writing of the lives of saints, literature with its own conventions. Why to read hagiographic texts as a biography? Being a distinctively Christian literary form, it is rooted in the forms and structures of Greco-Roman biography. Hagiography means simply a biography that treats its subject with undue reverence. In parentheses, I remind you that Ethiopian Church was part of the Alexandrian Patriarchate from the 1st till 20th century, and its kingdom itself presented as a Christian kingdom. Okay. The text is without any title, so all titles, Life of Lālibalā, Gadla Lālibalā, or others are conventional. The text was composed in Ge'ez. At least no other witnesses prior to Ge'ez version ever emerged. It is one of the 14 textual units of the Gadla Lālibalā collection. This division of the distinction of different textual units, I introduced myself to what was prior understood as a homogenic text. The Life of Lālibalā was partially edited by Jules Perrochon as La vie de Lālibalā, roi d'Éthiopie, and partially complemented by Stanislas Cour. No direct information about the author is given. We do not know whether it was a man or a woman. I will use pronoun he because the word author is in English is a masculine. So the author says he has a stammering tongue and that he's short-minded, but this is rather out of convention. We cannot trust it is an accurate self-portrait. There is no colophon of the text, which would allow us to learn the date and the place of composition. The author was able to write in Ge'ez. Ge'ez was not spoken anymore, according to the scholarly consensus at that time, already from the 11th century at the latest. So I assume that our author is someone who spoke one of the Ethio-Semitic languages. Probably the author was not one text author because the narration is well developed. There are already 3 manuscripts containing the Gadla Lālibalā collection, datable to the 14th, 15th century, that are attested in relatively remote places in today's Ethiopia. And their analysis shows traces of their Ethiopian itinerary, which means that even if not composed in Ethiopian kingdom, it circulated within its borders. Concerning the author's background, he was familiar with Psalter, Old and New Testament, Ascension of Isaiah, Enoch, and not Book of Enoch, but Enoch. And he was familiar with the flight of the Holy Family to Egypt, which he quotes. There are definitely other texts to be identified, but this was not yet done. The text was composed after Lālibalā's death. Lālibalā is a historical figure. He was a king, and his reign is attested in his land donations. We have a date, 1225, which testifies that he was still in power at that time and was not dead. What is the content of this text? It starts by describing the circumstances of Lālibalā's birth. He is born in Roha, one of the cities in Ethiopia. His birth is marked with a symbol. He is surrounded by bees. When he grows up, his brother king starts to fear him as a heir, and his sister tries to poison him. Poisoning makes him to ascend to the 7th heaven, where God reveals to him the sanctuaries created along with the earth hidden in its bowels. Lālibalā is appointed to the throne, and he receives a Kidan, testament, promising blessings to him and those who address him in prayers. Having returned to earth, Lālibalā runs away into desert. Then he gets married. His brother still tries to catch him up, eventually catches him up and orders to beat him, but Lālibalā escapes this, returning to his wife. He undertakes a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, meets a patriarch, visits holy places in Jerusalem, comes back to Ethiopia, joins his wife, and becomes a king. Before I move to the analysis of other scholars who read this text as a biography of Ethiopian society, I will allow myself one elaboration. It is crucial because it concerns Lālibalā's designation in relation to the outside world. We read that when Lālibalā reaches a patriarch, we do not know which, the patriarch admires him and asks the angel, "Who is this man?" The angel answers, "He is an Ethiopian." He uses word Ethiopiaui. Ethiopiaui is an adjective derived from Ethiopia. We know this adjective from King Izana's inscription attested in two languages, Greek and Ge'ez. In Greek, he is called Basileus Aithiopon, and Ge'ez Neguse Habasset, from which we learn that in Aksumite time, Ethiopia appears as a Greek equivalent of Habasat. In our text, Lālibalā is from Ethiopia, and he is Ethiopiaui. Why Greek Ethiopia replaced the original designation, Habasat? Keeping in mind that Ethiopia is a designation in relation to the rest of the world, two explanations can be given, probably both played a role. According to the scholars, al-Habasat in Arabic became strongly connotated. It was not a mere definition of a person from Ethiopia, but was understood as a slave. And Ethiopians who were in close contact with an Arabic-speaking world could not ignore it. Next, Ethiopia figures in the Bible. Maybe they opted for this name in order to inscribe Ethiopia in the history of salvation of the mankind. Gadla Lālibalā collection is discussed as a text that describes the creation of the churches ensemble of Lālibalā. According to the classification I have introduced, the actual construction of the churches is discussed not in the Life of Lālibalā, but in a text with a different author, which is entitled in my thesis as The Story About the Virtuous Deeds of Lālibalā, transmitted along the life of Lālibalā as part of the Gadla Lālibalā collection. From this text, we learn how King Lālibalā, helped by workers and angels, built the churches modeled after the heavenly sanctuaries, and then asked God to return the kingdom of Israel, which means to restore the Solomonic dynasty. At the end, Lālibalā fell ill and passed away on the 12th of the month of Haziran. While this distinction between the text is crucial for addressing the question of author's position vis-à-vis Lālibalā's legitimacy to the throne, whether he was Solomonic or not, it is less important in what concerns the churches and their discussion. As textual witnesses' testimony, the collection has been transmitted by various actors till nowadays. I myself witnessed in 2017 a process of copying this text on parchment in Shire, one of the cities in Tigray region. Given the continuous textual transmission of the text till nowadays, I would like to discuss two contributions by two contemporary scholars that address today's problems of Ethiopia through the lens of the life of Lālibalā and the story of the virtuous deeds. The author does not quote each other, but seem to be in dialogue with one another. One can also see two different claims over the right to interpret Ethiopia. Both authors imply that they belong to the Ethiopian society. The first author is Yekuna Amlak Mezgebu Zarabaruk, an Ethiopian scholar in Ge'ez language and literature, director of the Ethiopian National Archive and Library Agency. I think Professor Bausi was signaling me this article in which he discusses an impact that Gadla Lālibalā as a cultural genre has on the creative life of the Ethiopian nation. He raises the question of what happened to Ethiopia after Lālibalā. He reads the Gadla Lālibalā as antithesis of Lālibalā. What Yekuna Amlak names Gadla Lālibalā, in fact, corresponds to Pirochon's excerpts edited as La vie de Lālibalā, roi d'Éthiopie. Yekuna Amlak argues that the establishment of Lālibalā as a holy place replaced Jerusalem in view of Ethiopian Christians, thanks to the ideological structure reflected both in the church ensemble and in the Gadla Lālibalā. At the same time, the author argues that The text is counterproductive and a grave misinterpretation of Lalibela as a national cultural project. Why? By stressing that Lalibela churches is a miracle and appropriating to angels the work of Ethiopian persons. Divine nature of the church ensemble, according to Yekuna Amlak, is recited by every priest and teacher as a refrain of one of the greatest success story of the country. The statements that ascribe to God what rightfully belong to men resulted in disempowering subsequent generations of Ethiopia from making their own Lalibelas and their own homes. If you have visited the places, you might have heard this yourself. Economlak continues that it can thus be argued in general that while some of the kings tried to make a secular Ethiopian civilization, the church unmade it, but by eloquently ascribing it to God. Coming to nowadays, the author argues that the urgency of construction has been transferred from the angels to the Chinese. Coming back to the antithesis churches of Lalibela versus Gadla Lālibalā, the author argues that unlike the creation of the churches, the discourse of the Gadla Lālibalā resulted in incalculating quiescence and avid expectancy in the Ethiopians. The metaphorical representation of having one's own Jerusalem has been defeated. The author concludes that the Gadla Lālibalā deprived Ethiopians from their rightful claim in making Lalibela, which led to the sad outcome of the ever-declining self-esteem of Ethiopians to the point that virtually every activity in the country is done by procured guidance from others. This rather bitter reading of the text is in striking contradiction with another essay that addresses the same theme. We come to Mohamed Meouak. He belongs to Ethiopian diaspora, which is part of the African diaspora since 2003, the sixth zone of Africa, concept that is rooted in Pan-Africanism. His philosophy can be associated with the ideas of Pan-Africanism too, and with a search for epistemic autonomy. In his article on Chronicles of Lalibela, Gibbonism and Ethiopian Studies, he discusses passages taken from what Richard Pankhurst called Chronicles of Lalibela in his book entitled The Ethiopian Royal Chronicles. Chronicles of Lalibela is in fact the English translation of some excerpts from the Pirochon's video Lalibela, Roi d'Éthiopie, which is French translation of some excerpts from the Gadla Lālibalā collection, mainly from the story about the virtuous deeds of Lalibela. The method that Mohamed Meouak uses, he calls kine-hermeneutical reading, that allows him to unpack different meanings of the text. He argues that the reading brings out the emancipatory ideas that gestate in the chronicles according to his terminology, Gadla Lālibalā according to commonly used terminology, and throws light in the reason that prevent Ethiopians of the 21st century from becoming the authors and actors of their history. So the same idea is addressed to the same text. He further argues that the chronicler, who is obviously unable to explain the construction of Lalibela's remarkable rock churches, has recourse to a tale of miracles. What does miracle mean? When the chronicler attributes to miracles the construction of the churches of Lalibela that he described in the text as having been built by the workers. This is a question. Indeed, as we shall see, even though the chronicles mention the presence of angels as workers, the chronicles note also that the workers deny the presence of angels. The miracles are miracles because they reveal the contradiction of the life context of Ethiopians that they have to overcome. At the same time, they announce the need to overcome these contradictions. God's command to Lalibela to create on earth what he saw in the heavens points to non-articulated critique of medieval Ethiopian society, according to the author. Hence, the call to build the heavenly city here on earth is an alternative context of life to resolve earthly contradictions. I have identified all passages discussed by Member Menesenai. All those that follow are taken from the story about the virtuous deeds. Of course, I took only those that do not contradict with what I'm going to present. So the first quotation he discusses, "You are worthy of bringing them, the churches, out of the bowels of the earth through my power, but not through the wisdom of men, for mine is very different from that of men." The Chronicle's conception of the knowledge of the bowels of the earth intimates an approach that one could call cooperation with nature or working with nature. Cooperation with or working with the forces of the bowels of the earth excludes relations of domination between human beings, Ethiopians in this case, and nature. The carving out of the churches of Lalibela from the mountains is a conflictual process between human urgency and autonomous nature's resistance to human action. It is via these conflictual relations between human actions and nature's autonomy that the workers bring forth a new objective reality that expresses the emancipation of Ethiopians by naturalizing man and humanizing nature. The embodiment of this process are the churches of Lalibela that the workers carved out from the living rock of the mountains. The notion of cooperation with nature that lurks the chronicles intimate a distinction between mastering nature and exploiting nature. You are worthy of bringing them. By saying this, the chronicler introduced a new idea that divine knowledge is accessible to Ethiopians. The second quotation that goes along reads as follows: Lalibela ordered the manufacture of a large number of iron tools of all kinds, some to cut out the stone, others to hew it, as well as many others for the construction of a temple in the rock. Making and using tools considered in medieval Ethiopia as activities unfit for the educated and the noble. But in the chronicles, they are symptoms or signs of the objective and good knowledge that can provide the means for implementing God's knowledge of the bowels of the earth. Theoretical and practical epistemic autonomy, the appropriation of God's knowledge of the bowels of the earth, and the manufacturing of the tools to apply this knowledge makes Ethiopians miracle makers. Linking the discussion to the 21st century, the author argues that in borrowing or outsourcing knowledge, book knowledge, or the wisdom of men, we have renounced our epistemic autonomy and thus our capacities to acquire divine knowledge, to be what the chronicler would call miracle makers. The chronicle critiques of book knowledge and their call for epistemic autonomy are part of the Ethiopians' intellectual tradition that Ethiopians need to go back. Starting with the chronicles on Lalibela, we have an Ethiopian intellectual tradition that bears within itself, avant la lettre, an epistemic critique on the current practice of not subjecting to analysis borrowed or outsourced knowledge in Ethiopia. The third quotation to discuss reads as follows: after having made the tools necessary for his work, he ordered everyone to assemble and spoke to them, saying, "You are all gathered together here. Tell me what wages you want to help build these churches, which God has ordered me to erect. Let every man, stonemason, an excavator of the soul alike, inform me as to the wages which he requires. Speak up, all of you, and what you ask of me, I will give you to start, that you will not say that I made you work against your will. For I do not want you to labor to be without recompense, not that you should murmur. By saying, you will not say, I made you work against your will, he introduces in Ethiopian political discourse the novel idea that the will of Ethiopians is the source of the agreement that binds subjects and rulers. We further read in the text, each person thereupon made known what he wanted, and the king paid what he had promised. He did it without fail from the day of the construction of the churches began till the day when it was finished. He gave wages to everyone, to those who cut the stone, to those who fashioned it, and to those who carried away the debris resulting from the cutting. Meouak interprets these lines, arguing that Lālibalā's recognition of the freedom of each to evaluate the worth of his work does not apply only to those who have skills. The chronicler referred to those who carried away the debris resulting from the cutting, in the same breath as they do to those who are engaged in skilled work, suggesting the idea that equal respect is due to all workers, skilled or unskilled, and that such equal respect is a constitutive norm. He stresses, what is important is how in the chronicle fantasy incubates a new social imaginary and the emancipatory language we need for articulating ideas and norms that could not be stated in the hegemonic language of medieval Ethiopia, that is, the autonomy, dignity, and sociality of labor, and the central role it plays in the creation of a new civilization. The heavenly city here on earth in the language of the chronicles. The final quote about the angels. The angels worked with them by day and by themselves by night. The men would do a cubit's work during the day, but would find a further 3 cubits completed on the morrow, for the angels worked throughout the night. However, they doubted whether angels were doing this work because they could not see them. But Lālibalā knew, because the angels who understood his virtue did not hide from him. The angels were his companions, and for that reason did not hide from his side. Meouak's analysis suggests to recognize here an epistemic break between the emperor's and workers' claims regarding what is and is not real. The emperor, as a person not engaged in laboring, seems to be a captive of the dominant belief or the wisdom of men, of the era that asserts the existence of angels. The laborers, on the other hand, cast away their self-perception as a subalterns of society and see themselves as God angels of labor. Meouak suggests that the author implies that the workers, through their labor and the epistemic autonomy, have attained through their appropriation of God's knowledge a cognitive mapping of the world and of their relations to it, more secular and more autonomy affirming from the one held by the emperor. As co-workers with humans in transforming the balls of the earth, the angels disclose that to labor is to do God's work, and that as laborers, Ethiopians are of the same quality as angels. Meouak suggests to understand what is implied referring to the idea of a labor as a transformative power, as Marx implied too. I quote, "The surplus meaning here is that laboring and its outcomes cannot but alter the self-understanding of the laborers and their understanding of the world in a way that affirms their autonomy, responsibility, and dignity." Now, if you ask me which of 2 readings is right, the first one or the second one, I will tell you, use your own epistemic autonomy, give your own reading, and the text can accommodate both readings. Or more, many more. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for this very nice talk, and also for respecting the time, which leaves you much more time for debate. So Let's start questions and answers. Are there any questions? It's early in the morning, it's Saturday morning, yes, but yeah, sì, volentieri.
How much you see the relationship between the writer or the writers and the church. I see that you have analyzed above all the relationship with the state, with the Lālibalā, with the emperor, but is there also a kind of connection with the ideological system of the church in those kind of lives, or the institutional church is left on the margins?
I'm not sure I understood well. I will try to answer, and if I'm not in the right line, you will correct me. So I discussed the power, the ideology, and this because it is a text about the king who is considered a usurper by the later dynasty, so it is an interesting case in itself. There is no institution of canonization in Ethiopia, so when we speak about these texts, we only estimate the number of the texts, so I cannot speak about all Gadla. Only very little is known, only very little is published, only very little is studied, but we can already from not very little we know to say that there are different relations with the state. Stephen Kaplan, he made a research saying that a lot of the saints, they are in opposition with the power. Yeah. Some are in opposition with the church. So there are all kinds of critique, but in my particular text, there is no any opposition. The Life of Lālibalā does not criticize the church, the politics. Nothing is criticized.
So they are particularly in agreement. All the powers, church, and the saints are completely.
It is not just expressed. The reading, the hermeneutic reading, allows to see the potential critics for the society and the practices, because it, in a way, gives an idealistic idea of how it should work, the cooperation. I do not know whether I answered you.
Yes, it is to get a clear idea about the relationship between the so-called powers and the authors.
Any other question? Alberto is with, yeah, of course.
Thank you very much, Nafisa. I would like to ask you if, since you are very familiar with the site and also with everything taking place around it, did you find any other cases of modern utilization of the figure of Lālibalā besides what you have now mentioned? So these two, let's say, interpretations. But what is happening also on the site, in the society, around the cult and the devotion towards this figure? Can you add anything? Because I think this is really, so we know also from the point of view of publications how much is appearing. There is, so the Ethiopian church is extremely vital, productive, and self-reflecting. So would you add anything concerning these two more theoretical positions at another level, maybe?
It is very interesting that these two authors, none of them have consulted or used the publications that took place in Ethiopia. So they all used the ancient publication by Perochon. I wonder whether because it is for English publication they would do it in a different way, whether they are aware of these new editions. I think that at least Ikuna Amlak knows for sure. So there are this text, it is because there is this place Lālibalā, the churches. Of course it attracts people. It is a very important part of Ethiopian identity, but only it does not only serve as a pilgrimage place, it is also a lieu de mémoire for Lālibalā. And of course it makes Lālibalā a special figure, and it raises interest to this text and different interpretations. So there are, yes, there is a particular identity around this place. They all associate themselves more with Lālibalā. They even consider themselves more independent from the patriarchate. They do not consider the letter you bring from the patriarch. They say, we need to decide, our own council should decide for you. So it is, they have their autonomy. And I think that it is also related to the fact that the state is not there when the wars happened and they were disconnected from electricity. The state was not there, so they do not feel they are supposed to consider anyone else. They just try to survive, but also because Lālibalā is an outsider from all this state discourse, because he is from a different dynasty. The dynasty that came to power in the 13th century, they tried to use his image for their own legitimization, but there are studies that say that they always try to deprive him from any royalty, to stress that he was a saint but not a real ruler. So all this gives this side through the history that they would oppose the central power, claiming at some moment their own descendants from the queen, from King Solomon and Queen of Sheba by different not from Queen of Sheba, but from another person, or from Queen of Sheba. So they have all this very interesting interaction with this Solomonic myth. Sometimes they try to inscribe themselves, sometimes they try to develop a different story, sometimes they try to ignore. So this is all very dynamic, and it is very interesting that the text that is so many centuries old is also revised, commented, studied, translated many times. I think that there are 5 editions at least of this text nowadays.
Thank you very much for this long answer, but very detailed and precise. We can take a very small question, otherwise I prefer to, if there's any very, very small one, otherwise I think we can, yes?
Yes, I have a small question. I'm quite ignorant about all this, but I'm just going to ask you whether locally there is any distinction between the name of the place and the name of the king. I mean, is Lālibalā as a king named exclusively with this name, or do they use any other name connected with the ancient dynasty? I mean, the pre-Solomonic dynasty for this king in the area.
If I understood well, he has a royal name, Gebra Meskel. Gebra Meskel, the servant of the cross. And so this is his royal name, and he is known with both names. But there is no... The place itself had a different name. It is attested also that it was once called Roja. So when we write articles, we say Roja Lālibalā, because this place was called Lālibalā after the king, but when the king was there, it was not Lālibalā.
So exactly this was my
Yes.
question, because I heard about this name Roja, and
Yes.
I didn't know whether it was connected with the king or with the place itself.
And we do not know whether
So
it
it's
was also part of
just a
the
curiosity.
constructing the myth to inscribe this place into the biblical story. King Abgar from Roja, all these things. We are trying to historicize them, but before Lālibalā, the place was called Roja.
Roja, I see. Anyway, it is a place.
It's really short. It's not a question, just a small addition concerning the name, as Nafisa knows very well.
Lālibalā.
Lālibalā, exactly. The
Lālibalā.
oldest documents, and we have a lot of them, are consistent, and they give Lālibalā, not Lālibalā. That's it.
But depends how you read. I think that really
Well,
you
but
can read.
it's all the graphically gives no doubt. Yes, this is strange, but
Yeah, thank you for this. I was wondering, is it Lālibalā? Is it because I heard something else, and so I couldn't follow. So thank you for that.
the name of the town is Lālibalā,
Okay,
definitely.
Lālibalā.
But the name of the king in the
Okay.
earliest documents is Lālibalā.
Lālibalā. Okay.
Lālibalā, yes.
Thank you very much for your very insightful paper. But now we should get to our next speaker, Annunziata Di Rienzo. And please, let's switch places. So meanwhile, let me introduce her shortly. So Annunziata Di Rienzo has a joint PhD with la Sapienza Università di Roma and Ghent University, obtained in 2019 in philology and history of the ancient world, on a topic entitled Holiness and Power in Syriac hagiographic collections. Her research fields include Eastern Christianity, so a focus on Syriac and Coptic, Syriac language and hagiography, and Coptic codicology. She was part, as a postdoc, of the ERC paths at La Sapienza on the literary production in Coptic. Without further ado, I'll give the floor to Ms. Di Rienzo.
Thank you. Okay. When I choose the topic of my paper, I meant just to present a classical life of a saint monk. I expected to stress the characteristics of this kind of biographies, some possible peculiarities, to finally point out the theme of ascetics as a center of cultural crossroads that the textual tradition on the figure of John Colobos exemplifies. I still did not know how much difficult would have been going a bit in depth with the complex question of the Coptic manuscript tradition about this life. I suppose that probably not everyone here is very into the Coptic study, so probably it would be a great issue for me to try to explain this complexity to such a various audience, for you to follow me in this articulate reconstruction. But as my interests deal with codicology, history, and philology altogether, I feel in some way compelled to touch also the philological and codicological problems. So, my aim today is trying to present the Encomium of John Colobos by Zaccaria of Soho as biographic work with its description of a classic monk life, and on the other hand, the textual tradition with its problematics, its success, and its parallelism with the regional ascetics as both examples of a cultural crossroads. Oh, I'm sorry, the Coptic cannot be read. Okay. John the Short, John the Little, Jean le Petit, John the Dwarf, Jean le Nain. Various are the way how the name of John Colobos, Ioannis P. Colobos, has been translated. In any case, the name Colobos in Greek and Coptic refers to his physical appearance, his stature, and the way how his biography more than once puts the accent on his opposite moral and spiritual elevation, I think is not a chance. Who is John Colobos? John is a monk his monastic activity is carried out in cities in the 4th century. In the literary sources concerning his life, few historical data can help us to place his life in a more precise historical period and place. We just know that he was born in a village in the region of Oxyrhynchus, Lower Egypt, that he begins his monastic life at the age of 18, and he dies at 70. Few are the references to historical events in this biography. We know that he was probably in touch with Theophilus of Alexandria, who is patriarch in the period of 385-412. We know that a barbaric invasion forces him to leave Satis at the end of the 4th century, but according to Evelyn White, followed by Regnault, doubtless in 407, but it is doubtful. He died near Clysma at the end of the 4th century or at the beginning of the 5th century. Attestations of his life and activity can be found in some Byzantine synaxaria. The Copto-Arabic Alexandrian synaxarion, attributed to Michael of Atrib, commemorates John's death on the 20th of Babar, 1718 October, and the translation of his relics on the 29th of Misri, 21st of August. The source for the Alexandrian synaxarion seems to be a Life of John Colobos by Zachariah of Sekhar, or Sekhou, Clavis Coptica 428. This work is more precisely a panegyric pronounced by the bishop Zachariah in occasion of the commemoration of John's death on the 20th of Babar of an uncertain year. The panegyric, to which I will dedicate most of my paper from now on, is based on another source, the so-called Apophthegmata Patrum, a collection of memorable words and anecdotes of the Desert Fathers that contains a good number, more or less 50, of short narrations about John. Zachariah, by his side, uses many of them to prepare his encomium. Few necessary observations on panegyric as a literary genre. A panegyric, an encomium, is an hagiographic work with an oral aim and destination. René Egren presents this genre as a sort of moment of transition toward the hagiographic narrations in the strictest sense of the word. As other hagiographic genres, and even more than them, it is usually based not only on written sources, but also on oral narrations and anecdotes. It is pronounced in a precise occasion, which is usually mentioned at the beginning, and usually also at the end of the text, also referred in the title where available, and titles are very common in Coptic. The occasion is usually the commemoration of the death of the saint. The panegyric is pronounced before a crowd of people aiming at listening to the life, acts, and wonders of the holy man concerned. And for this oral destination, it usually makes extensive use of rhetoric. The story is a sequence of prodigious and edifying events. As scholars have often underlined, the development of Coptic hagiographic production from the 5th to the 8th century was accompanied by the production of encomia, dedicated to individual saints. Starting from the translation of the texts written by some 4th century fathers, later accompanied by the production of original texts in Coptic. It has been noticed that the most important period for the growth of Coptic encomia was the post-Chalcedonian one, when, for instance, some encomium by Severus of Antioch were translated, and then some encomia of anti-Chalcedonian monks were produced. For instance, Matthew the Poor, Moses of Ket, and so on. The structure of an encomium is always the same. It usually starts with a prologue where the occasion of the celebration is usually remembered. The narration of the life or passion, if the protagonist is a martyr, follows. The end is usually represented by some moral exhortations to the audience and the final epilogue. 3 Coptic homiletic works are attributed to Zachariah of Soho, the encomium, the mentioned encomium, and 2 homilies. The date of the panegyric concerning John Colobos is uncertain, We know that Zachariah was consecrated bishop by the Patriarch of Alexandria, Simon I, so this information provides us a terminus postquem in the 689. The narration of the Encomium of John Colobos is a typical story of a monk. The example is that of the life of Anthony, with the typical topoi one would expect to find in a monastic life, wonders, instructions, and very few historical references. John comes from an extremely poor family. Since he was a child, he demonstrates to be a citizen of heaven. Although young of age, he already displays highness of virtues and oldness in having the true signs much before having white hair. He goes to the cell of Apa Amoes or Bamuya, according to the source, who, guided by an angelic vision, accepts him as a disciple. Until here, nothing surprising. A typical monk life. Typical is the reference to John's desire to march on their traces, meaning the traces of the prophets, the apostles, and saints. Typical is the reference to Amoes' teachings, the meditation of the scriptures, and the constant prayer. The first half of the biography narrates the life of John with its master Amoes. I will dwell here on some episodes which better show the characteristics of the man that the biographer wants to stress. Obedience and readiness to follow the guidance and instructions of his abbot, even when the monk was not young and not a neophyte anymore, but throughout his life, is considered one of the main characteristics of monasticism. Among Coptic monks, John is considered the perfect example of virtue and obedience. One day, Amoes, in order to prove him, sends him away, tell him to find a different place to stay. But John remains in front of the entrance door of the cell, and every morning Amoes exits and uses a stick to send him away, repeating, "Go away." But John implores him his forgiveness for his sins, and remains there for 7 days and 7 nights without drinking or eating anything, repeating the consolatory words of the scripture and telling himself, "Who is the father who does not instruct his son?" Or, "The one who will endure until the end, he will be safe." On Sunday morning, going to the Mass, Amoes goes out and sees John with 7 angels placing 7 crowns on his head. At that vision, Amoes embraces John and lets him go in the cell again. The humility and wisdom of John emerge in another episode. Amoes asks him to explain to a group of monks what does being a monk means. John firstly refuses to answer because, he says, just God and his angels can guide the monk. Then, at Amoes' insistence, he puts off his clothes, standing naked before the brothers, and explains, if a man does not deprive himself of any earthly glory, he cannot become a good monk. In another passage, answering to a question about what a monk is, John explains, monk is suffering, monk is distress, monk is making violence to yourself. It means putting absolutely no personal desire before your word. But maybe the most famous episode is the so-called Tree of Obedience. Amoes plants a dry branch in a place 12 miles far from their cell, and he then asks John to go and water it every day until it bears fruit. Water was not easily available, but John, every evening for 3 years, leaves his cell with a bucket with some water and goes watering the branch, coming back in the morning. After 3 years, indeed, the tree bears fruit. Amoes takes the fruit and brings it to the church, where he proclaims, "Here is the fruit of obedience." After the death of Amoes, and after having cured and served him for 12 years, in the place where the tree of obedience had bloomed, John establishes his own monastery. The biography then goes on with a series of pictures of monastic life. In the region of Cetis, the prevalent form of monasticism we find is a kind of semi-anchoratism, under the influence of Antony probably, where the solitary and the communal life are balanced. The monk lives alone in his own cell, but he meets his brother on Saturday and Sunday and feast days when they gather at the church. On that occasion, they took together the meal, the agape, and they participate to the Eucharist. One of the main characteristics of this form of semi-anchorate monasticism was the obligation of manual work. At Cetis, the majority of the monks devoted themselves to basket making. This is what also our panegyric describes. This manual work was to be as far as possible continual, as well as prayer itself. Not only the manufacture and sale of baskets is described, John's life is described as also devoted to the harvest, frequent exhortation to his brothers, without forgetting miracles and parables. The narration ends with John running away from Cetis due to a barbaric invasion and seeking refuge in Clysma, where he dies. As a literary product, the Encomium has had a good fortune. We have an almost complete version in Coptic, Boeric Coptic, preserved in the Vaticano Copto 68, and probably a second fragment has been identified at Leipzig. On the other hand, we have the Saidic. Although scholars have often claimed the existence of Saidic fragments of the text, actually it is not at all certain that those fragments belong to a Saidic version of the same Encomium by Zachariah. They possibly belong to a different Life of John, or even to a different work. In the slide, that's reconstructions of CLM 559, the codex that contain the Saidic fragments. To notice that the literary work there contained is identified under another different Clavis Coptica siglum. Actually, the only part of narration preserved in Saidic narrates the account on John's journey to Babylon, on which I will return soon. If remains of a same work, the Saidic fragments should testify an older version which differs a lot from the Boeric one. Is the Saidic the original version, the language of Zachariah's speech, and the basis for the other version? This is still very doubtful. According to Orlandi, it is probable that Zachariah composed his works in the Saidic Coptic, which was still prevalent in the 8th century. If so, the translation into Boeric should have been done, together with the other homilies by Zachariah and other similar texts, at the monastery of St. Macarius. From the Coptic, the work has been translated into Arabic in the 9th century, and from Arabic into Syriac in the 10th century. I'm pretty sure that the Syriac translation, but probably also the passage from Coptic to Arabic, or the possible opposite one, took place at Cetis. One of the Syriac witnesses is preserved in a codex produced in Cetis in the 10th century, the first one in the slide, where you have also the other Syriac witnesses of the text. According to François No, there is a strong possibility that the Encomium was actually not pronounced in Coptic, but in Arabic. The Syriac and Coptic texts do not differ so much, although Amelino, the editor of the Coptic versions, see what he calls some gnosticism in some places of the text. As Snow points out, by this expression, some gnosticism, he meant obscurity, lack of clarity, a lack of clarity that does not recur in Syriac, where the text is much clearer and coherent. More interestingly are the evident differences between the two Coptic, Saidic, and Boeric versions of the panegyric. The only passage surviving in Saidic, indeed, denotes meaningful differences with the Boeric. The episode of the meeting with the Patriarch Theophilus of Alexandria mixes one of the rare historical references with the wondrous aspect, at least in Boeric. The episode, present in Coptic, Syriac, and Arabic, cannot be found in any Greek source on John Colobos. Here I will present a short resume of the Boeric and Syriac version, Theophilus builds a temple in honor of the three children martyrized in the furnace, according to the famous account of Book of Daniel. He would like to keep the relics in the new church. An angel of God tells him that the only man who can find them is John. So Theophilus asks John, and a cloud descends and transports John to Babylon, where he finds the remains of the martyrs. The holy bodies of the martyrs appear, but they refuse to follow him in Alexandria, as God wants them to remain there until the end of time. They will therefore be spiritually present there during the years of the Patriarch Theophilus and the following two patriarchs. Then they will leave that temple forever, as the heresy will reign all over the world. We can notice here a clear anti-Chalcedonian polemic note. Considering that the episode is almost completely different in Sahidic, much more realistic and with less wonder aspects, one would ask, was this episode originally attributed to our John, or can this be a later interpretation? Actually, in other sources, the protagonist of the episode is another and more famous John, John of Lycopolis. According to Orlandi, the attribution of this wonder to John by Zachariah is probably deliberate, the original protagonist being John of Lycopolis. Although we have to confess that the confusion between the two John is already present in Cassianus. So Zachariah could have been a more or less conscient victim of this misunderstanding. At the end, I would say that if a Sahidic version of the Encomium is supposed to be the original one, in my opinion, this supposed original Sahidic text does not correspond to the Sahidic fragments we have, which pertain to a different version of the life or even to a different work. As we have seen, the panegyric is preserved in three languages, Coptic, Syriac, and Arabic, with this last one as point of convergence of the three. The other point of convergence is represented by a place, Setis, an area of monastic settlements extending about 30 kilometers through the valley called Vadal Natron. Setis is a place of compresence of cultures. It is the place where John lives and acts. Maybe Isigoumenos there, but this information is doubtful. Setis is where one of the fathers of Coptic monasticism, Abba Bishoy, lives and acts. That Abba Bishoy, whose biography, surviving in Syriac, is attributed to John Colobos himself. No Coptic version survives of this life in my knowledge, but I may mistake. Setis is where at least the Syriac version has been produced, probably in a precise monastery of the region, the monastery of the Syrians. Dar al-Suryan was founded by Coptic monks, those who in the 6th century had left the near Deir Amba Bishoy after a dispute with their brothers over the human nature of the body of Christ. The new monastery was called the Monastery of the Holy Virgin of Abba Bishoy, but it was later known as the Monastery of the Syrians, Dar al-Suryan, after a group of Syrian monks settled here, probably around the year 800. If Setis is a place of compresence of cultures, Dar al-Suryan is even more a meeting point of traditions. The Syriac one, brought there by Syriac monks, the Coptic one, as the monastery from the 9th century onward, according to inscription and parietal decorations, Syriac and Coptic monks have lived together. In the course of the 16th and 17th century, the Syrian monastic community gradually decreased, and only Coptic monks remained as inhabitants of Dar al-Suryan. Dar al-Suryan soon becomes a very important center of collection and production of manuscripts. Some have been produced there, some other ones have been brought there from the east, thanks in particular to the activity of Moses of Nisibis, the 10th century abbot of the monastery. At that time, Coptic monks living there also used the Arabic language, and not only Syriac and Coptic, but also Arabic manuscripts have been transcribed there. at the monastery of the Syrians, we have noticed above, at least one of the Syriac witnesses of the panegyric has been produced, translating the text from a former Arabic codex. So, Syriac, Coptic, and Arabic languages and cultures meet at the Rea Suriana. The biography of John Colobos and its manuscript tradition well fits in this panorama, a classical life of a Coptic monk, living in a place of meetings of cultures that, in its own tradition, well portrays and shows the multicultural milieu the Vadi al Najm represents. Thank you.
Wonderful in every way, even the 25 minutes. Wonderful. Thank you for this rich, exciting paper and beautiful images. I tried to. The floor is open for any questions. I suppose there are many questions, or at least one to start with. Philippe? No? Yes, of course. Alberto, someone should start.
The codicological question and the philological question is very complex, it's very difficult. I am a little, I'm wondering if in Syriac we do not have other attestations, but a translation from Arabic. So there is nothing about Colobos that can come from a different tradition, for example, from Greek. This is strange because normally this is not the normal itinerary of tradition in Syriac, but it is possible. Yeah. I think that you have a colophon that says that there is a translation from Arabic.
I don't remember exactly. But that's what François knows suppose.
Yes.
Yeah. But I don't remember exactly.
And the other question is, probably we have an encomium written Saidic, in Greek, Saidic. It is very difficult to but this encomium is based on probably a literary tradition. So now I'm speaking not about the philological problem, but the literary construction of a bios. And I would like to understand which are the materials on which this encomium is built. For example,
Apophthegmata Patrum.
Only Apophthegmata Patrum.
I think more or less.
When you mentioned the episode of Theophilus, that is connected to, in some way, to John, I think that there could be a memory of the rich relationship of Theophilus with the Pacomian monks. For example, we have a lot of episodes. So I think that beyond the Apophthegmata Patrum, there were also other possible sources. For example, the writer could use, not Zacharias, but for example, the traditional bios on which the encomium of Zacharias is built could use, for example, the Pacomian material or other. The question of Theophilus is very complex. So his relationship with the building of churches, his relationship with the monks, we have plenty of legends about whose main theme is the problematic relationship between the Patriarchate of Alexandria and the monks. Only just to say this. I leave it here.
Yeah, thank you. But this is very difficult to say because we have seen that the episode is also attributed to other John, so it is very difficult to understand whence the episode comes and to what John is attributed at the beginning.
Are there any other questions? There's still time, so take the opportunity. Do you have something to add?
I don't think so.
I think it was clear, but you never know. She still has some ways. So, yeah, okay, Fernando, please. Yes, of course.
Just a curiosity, I know nothing about these biographies, but I wonder whether these biographies, besides the events of the personal events of the monk, of the saint they depict, do they give also glimpses of the society, of what the life of people outside the monasteries, because this literature is very, of course, related to monastery, monks, and so. But of course, we would wish to know more about the rest of the society. I suppose that it is maybe possible pick small episodes and build and have a build. But yes, you know better. So if you can give
in other
me some.
cases, yes, but in this case, I haven't found anything else outside the monastic life. I think this is linked to the genre of the encomium, the panegyric, which is an homiletic work in some way. So it's a mixture between hagiography and homiletic. So I haven't found in this case reference to the society or possible hints on this point, whether elsewhere in other texts, hagiographic texts, it is quite common, but not in this case.
Eileen has also a question here.
Very general, because I don't know enough about this period and this place, but what in this research is the most exciting part of it for you? And is it a part of some other larger project that you're working on? Or just sort of to help situate this work in terms of your interests and...
I study hagiography, so this is a part of my studies in hagiography in general. So it's the first time I think that I deal in particular with a monk life, but it's in general. And I wanted to stress also the crossroads of cultures, because I used to study hagiography in Syriac. It's the first time I approach hagiography in Coptic, so I want to stress how this hagiographic tradition has an ether, a journey from Coptic to true Arabic to Syriac, or some similar way. I mean, so for me it was interesting to stress this links between cultures, different cultures in the East.
I think you've done a great job. Thank you so much for your nice talk. I suggest we take 5 minutes of pause, 5 just to go to the restroom, 5 we are still in time, so 5 minutes, and then that gives Mohamed Meouak also the time to install himself. 5 minutes.
Okay.
Oui, il y a un problème d'acoustique, j'ai l'impression. Ah, ouais. Oui, oui. Je crois qu'il y a un problème d'acoustique, oui. Ah, d'accord. D'accord. Tu sais pas la meilleure. J'avais collé mon truc et je l'ai pas retrouvé, il a disparu.
Ah non, non, mais non, il n'a pas disparu. Tu aurais dû m'attendre parce que je l'ai tout regroupé.
Ah, ça, je savais pas. Ça.
Parce que sinon, c'est difficile.
D'accord.
Mais tu l'as...
Ça y est, ça y est.
Ça
y est, ça y est.
Parce que sinon, on va tarder. Ils vont me faire de pression. Moi, j'ai pas ça.
But you can go. Okay, guys, let's take it. Yes. What it is. Again, let's continue. I'm most happy to present our colleague and newly elected academician, Mohamed Meouak, who is full professor at the University of Cádiz, where he teaches the social history of Al-Andalus and Islamic institutions in the pre-modern period. Among the many topics on which he has published, or for instance, the political structures of the Umayyad state of Cordoba, Arabic Islamic onomastics, Arab Islamic biography and prosography, and the historical geography of Andalusian territories. Since the 1990s, he has devoted his research to examining the vestiges of the Amazigh language in Arabic sources, cultural and linguistic contexts between the Maghreb and the Sahel in the Middle Ages, the historical geography of the regions of the Ares, Ziben and Wed Souf, to the modes and of land occupation and rural landscapes of the Central Eastern Maghreb, and the Arabic dialects of the Maghreb documented in written sources. This is just a glimpse of the many topics. I'll leave the floor to him, 30 minutes, and then we have some debate left.
Merci pour cette introduction, Mena. Avant d'entreprendre un bref voyage dans l'Afrique du Nord au XVe siècle, début du XVIe siècle, je voudrais remercier chaleureusement l'Accademia Ambrosiana, en la personne de Monseigneur Francesco Braschi, d'une part, et la professeure Eileen, Julien et la professeure Mena Lafkioui pour avoir pensé à moi dans le cadre de ce colloque sur Envisioning and Representing Africa. Je les remercie tous chaleureusement. Alors, cette communication traite fondamentalement d'un type de source curieux, me semble-t-il, puisque c'est un type de source qui recueille en fait des nécrologies, des notices nécrologiques et biographiques contenant un certain nombre de matériaux anthroponymiques, ethnonymiques et toponymiques berbères. Il n'y a pas en réalité de choses, exceptionnelles, si j'ose dire, si ce n'est la précision avec laquelle l'auteur Ahmad bin Yahya al-Wanšarīsī nous rapporte un certain nombre de données sur un certain nombre de personnages qui apparaissent dans ce répertoire. C'est un répertoire qui est court, qui fait à peu près une centaine de pages, dans l'édition de Mohamed Ben Youssouf el-Qadi, qui a été édité au Caire en 2009. En tout cas, c'est une des éditions les plus récentes, je crois. Alors, une petite carte de l'Occident musulman aux alentours du XIIe siècle. Je n'ai rien trouvé de sérieux sur l'Occident musulman au XVe et au XVIe. Il en existe, bien entendu, mais je n'ai pas eu la chance de tomber dessus. Alors, les objectifs et les limites de l'étude. Alors, il est bien connu que l'historiographie maghrébine d'expression arabo-berbère de la fin du Moyen-Âge héberge des sources d'une grande importance, d'une grande valeur, comme ceux relevant du genre hagiographique, du genre biographique, du récit de voyage ou de la chronique locale. Donc, dans les pages qui suivent, dans les instants qui suivront, on essaiera de parler un petit peu, d'évoquer des noms de personnes, des modes de désignation des tribus et dénomination des lieux d'habitat dans le domaine, dans l'espace berbère. Alors, quand j'arrive ici à ce point-là, et je me rappelle de la réflexion tout à fait indispensable et nette de Tassadit Yassine, de la professeure Tassadit Yassinière, à propos de la recherche du berbère, de ce qui est berbère, simplement se centrant sur les îlots berbères. Non, on essaie ici de balayer, si j'ose dire, tout le nord de l'Afrique, et même plus loin, quand cela est possible, le Sahel, dans la mesure des possibilités, bien sûr, ce qui ne sera pas le cas ici de toute façon. Alors, cette ère culturelle sera examinée à travers la compilation d'un certain nombre d'informations qui concernent la langue, les langues berbères, je ne sais pas, renvoie ici à un article fameux et peut-être pionnier de Lionel Galland, existe-t-il une langue berbère ou la langue berbère, du XIVe siècle jusqu'au XVIe siècle. Et alors, donc on est en plein Moyen-Âge central, fin du Moyen-Âge même, et pour ce faire, on mettra donc à contribution ce recueil de nécrologie, biographie de Ahmad bin Yahya al-Wanšarīsī, le Kitab al-Wafayat, le livre des nécrologies, le livre des décès. Donc on essaie, succinctement, on verra quelques données anthroponymiques, ethnonymiques et toponymiques qu'on peut d'ores et déjà qualifier de pièces fondamentales, bien sûr, tout le monde le sait, je crois, d'un système onomastique, me semble-t-il, à géométrie variable. Ce système onomastique berbère est complexe. Je n'ai pas la prétention ici d'apporter, de faire leçon sur ce domaine. Il y a des autorités, il y a des collègues, des pairs qui ont travaillé sur cette question, peu, mais il y en a quelques-uns, et qui ont donné des résultats absolument fondamentaux. Alors, l'auteur va être présenté et on verra donc les détails plus en avant. Alors, Abul Abbas Ahmad bin Yahya al-Wanšarīsī, quelques éléments de biographie, érudit nord-africain. Cet auteur s'appelait de son nasab, de son généalogie complète, Abul Abbas Ahmad bin Yahya bin Mohamed bin Abdallah bin Abdel-Wahid ou Abdallah bin Ali al-Wanšarīsī. Il est célèbre pour avoir exercé en tant que juriste, qadi ou faqih et mufti malikite, surtout mufti. Il reçut une éducation traditionnelle dans la région natale, dans sa région natale, et à Tlemcen, au temps des Abdel-Wadid. C'est une dynastie qui couvre à peu près la fin du Moyen-Âge, le tout début des temps modernes. Mais tout début des temps modernes, on va dire un premier XVIe siècle. Son nom d'origine géographique, la Nisba, qui est le nom d'origine géographique, ici, dans ce cas-là, un renvoi au mont des Warsénis, al-Wanšarīsī, situé dans le nord-ouest du Maghreb central, qui correspond à l'Algérie, où il naquit. Parmi ses maîtres, on citera brièvement Qasim al-Uqbani, ensuite Abu Abdullah ibn al-Abbas, Abu al-Abbas ibn Zakri, al-Manawi, al-Tilimsani, etc., des éminences de l'époque, surtout qualifiées en sciences religieuses et en droit musulman principalement. Suite à un différend avec le sultan zianide Mohamed le 4, qui lui est décédé en 1504, al-Wanšarīsī fut contraint de quitter Tlemcen pour s'installer à Fès, au Maroc, capitale des Mérinides, où il séjourna, où il mourut, en l'année 1508. Donc la date de décès de Ahmad al-Wanšarīsī, c'est 1508. Son œuvre se compose donc d'une trentaine d'ouvrages, dont la pièce maîtresse est le Kitab al-Mi'yar al-Mu'rib ou le Jami' al-Mu'rib an Fatawi ulama Ifriqiya wa l'Andalus al-Maghrib, qui est un ouvrage juridique. Ce sont des compilations de dictamens juridiques, de consultations juridiques qui sont données tout au long de cet ouvrage. Il y a environ 2200-2300 consultations. C'est une histoire sociale, je vous assure. Ce texte est fabuleux. Cette littérature est pénible et répétitive, mais il y a plein d'histoires. Et l'avantage, c'est qu'on a des gens avec leurs noms et prénoms. Et on a beaucoup de matériaux sur l'histoire sociale de ces régions. Ça couvre évidemment le Maroc, l'Algérie, la Tunisie, voire même par moments la Libye. Alors, Donc, les Wafayette, un petit répertoire de nécrologie et biographie. Alors, l'étude se base donc sur cet ouvrage, le livre des nécrologies. Il contient près de 350 notices. À la lumière des matériaux disponibles, on sait que l'œuvre fut composée à la fin de la vie de l'auteur, car le dernier individu enregistré dans ce répertoire mourut le 19 février 1507, quand on sait que al-Wanšarīsī est décédé en 1508, le 20 juin 1508, très exactement, selon les biographes. Alors, sur le genre historiographique de type nécrologique ou obituaire, on connaît au moins un précédent nord-africain. Au moins un. Il s'agit des Wafayette d'Ibn al-Qunfuz al-Qassantini, un Constantinois qui meurt un siècle avant notre protagoniste. Alors, malgré une relative notoriété des Wafayette comme genre, des Wafayette ici d'al-Wanšarīsī, il faut reconnaître que celles-ci ont peu été utilisées par la recherche contemporaine. Pourtant, l'œuvre en question appartient à un type historiographique déjà en vogue dans l'Orient arabo-musulman. On a plusieurs cas, je me permets de les citer ici rapidement. Ibn Khallikan, mort en 1282, et ses Wafayette al-Ayyan wa Anba ibn al-Zaman. Ibn al-Suqa'i, chrétien, mort en 1326, et son Tali Kitab Wafayette al-Ayyan. Khalil ibn Aybak al-Safadi, très connu par les spécialistes, mort en 1361. Et on a Ibn Shakir al-Kutubi, en 1363, c'est Fawat al-Wafayette. Et un dernier exemple que j'ai ici trouvé par hasard dans une source, le yéménite Abu Makhrama al-Tayyib ibn Abdullah, mort en 1540, et ça qiladat an-nar fi Wafayette Ayyan ad-Dahar. Une littérature donc qui existe bien, mais qui apparemment n'était pas vraiment prisée dans le Maghreb, en Afrique du Nord en tout cas. Brève description du livre, si vous le voulez, et structure de base des notices. Le recueil donc est divisé en 3 sections, correspondant à l'un des 3 siècles couvrant l'œuvre, les 14e, 15e et 16e siècles. Des 347 personnages enregistrés, plusieurs d'entre eux furent des juristes d'origine maghrébine, avec quelques cas andalousiens et orientaux. Alors, après l'indication de l'année examinée, l'auteur, al-Wanšarīsī, signale les personnages qui moururent durant l'année en question. Pour chaque individu, on trouve la chaîne onomastique, le nasab, plus ou moins développée, plus ou moins complète. Il y a aussi quelques éléments, à mon avis, utiles quand on s'intéresse au genre biographique, bien sûr, et plus loin prosopographique, mais on en reparlera. Date de décès, il y a plusieurs donc notices, éléments d'origine géographique, la nisba, dont on va parler, les lieux de naissance, le lieu de naissance, le lieu de décès, la date exacte du décès, et les causes parfois du décès, les qualités intellectuelles de l'individu, les charges exercées, les activités développées, les œuvres, les voyages, etc., etc., etc. Toutefois, il faut tout de même admettre que bon nombre de ces biographies sont courtes, sont brèves. Ce sont si j'ose dire, des flashs qui nous permettent peut-être de resituer ces personnages qui peuvent être considérés comme d'illustres inconnus jusqu'à une certaine manière. Alors, avant d'aller plus loin et d'offrir quelques éléments d'information, quelques matériaux, je voudrais simplement rappeler ici, je ne suis pas moi vraiment spécialiste de la question, mais je rappellerai un certain nombre de travaux, que l'une des difficultés que l'on rencontre quand on travaille sur ce genre de sources, que ce soit les manuscrits inédits ou les textes édités, comme c'est mon cas ici avec les Wafayette, le texte arabe est édité. Et le problème, il réside, entre autres choses, un des problèmes réside dans d'abord détecter d'abord le matériel en berbère. on va dire, oui, mais si vous êtes berbérisant, c'est facile pour vous. Non, ce n'est pas aussi simple que ça, je regrette. Il y a autre chose aussi qu'il faudrait prendre en considération, c'est la graphie. Alors, toute la question de la graphie, je me suis servi ici de la graphie arabisante, si j'ose dire, puisque c'est elle qui apparaît, me semble-t-il, qui est dans le texte, si vous voulez, et je sais que cette graphie ne remplit pas forcément sa mission par rapport à ce qu'est le berbère en tant que langue, en tant que langue, fait linguistique. Autre question aussi, c'est la question de la segmentation des mots. Alors, on a parfois de la chance, on arrive à segmenter, on peut segmenter. D'autres fois, c'est plus compliqué. Là encore, on peut rétorquer que, bon, si vous êtes berbérisant, mon ami, vous êtes capable de segmenter. Non, ce n'est pas aussi simple que ça. Beaucoup de gens, quelques gens se sont cassés les dents en essayant de segmenter tel ou tel mot dans les textes arabes. Alors, ces mots-là, parfois, on a de la peine aussi à savoir. Vous allez peut-être sourire, mais où ça commence, où ça se termine. On dit oui, mais ça ressemble un petit peu à du berbère. Est-ce que c'est du berbère, c'est du latin, c'est du punique, c'est du grec, c'est du roman? Bon, toutes ces questions ont été admirablement bien traitées par des spécialistes. Je pense ici aux travaux de notre collègue Vermondo Brugnatelli, et je me rappelle aussi, on se rappelle tous, ceux qui se consacrent à ce genre de travail, un ou deux articles de Nico van den Boogert sur aussi ces questions de segmentation et de graphie en berbère, du berbère à l'intérieur de textes rédigés en langue arabe. Alors, quelques éléments importants. Alors, je vous préviens tout de suite, le premier terme qui est ici présenté, Jérôme, ne le prenez surtout pas en considération. Oubliez ce terme-là. Je crois avoir fait une erreur de transcription. Alors donc, évidemment, la traduction qui suit n'est pas valable, très discutable, n'est pas valable. S'il vous plaît, oubliez le premier terme. Alors, passons, si vous voulez, au deuxième terme, dans le cadre donc, de ces données anthroponymiques berbères. Alors, j'utilise la terminologie arabe, puisque c'est cette terminologie arabe qui apparaît donc dans le texte. Non, alors, Ibn Aberkan, le fils du noir, Ibn Yarmoura Hassan, on peut traduire, on peut donner un équivalent de fils de celui qui l'emporte sur eux, Yarmour, viril, les talons, le plus fort. On a aussi Al-Krek, à relier peut-être avec l'hydronyme Ragrag, Sif Urgrez. Il y a plein de points d'interrogation, vous verrez dans cette communication. Ibn Meouak, Zarou, Ibn Zarou, Hemmou. Bon, dans ce cas-là, je suis heureux. Ça me fait toujours plaisir de rappeler les travaux ici de notre défunt collègue l'Arbi Mzin, collègue marocain qui a travaillé admirablement bien sur des documents juridiques des XVIIe et XVIIIe siècle, Taïssa du Maroc, de l'Atlas marocain, des documents absolument fabuleux, parfois rédigés en 3 langues, arabe littéral, ou standard, je ne sais pas comment appeler ça, moyen arabe, je ne sais pas, arabe dialectal et berbère. Ces documents sont fabuleux, véritablement fabuleux. Alors, quelques autres indices ethnonymiques, cette fois-ci, nom de tribus berbères. Bon, Al-Massamida, tous les spécialistes connaissent, bien évidemment, les Masmouda, sous la forme d'un collectif. Banu Arnas, ici, au lieu de Banu, peut-être pourrait-on attendre les termes berbères de Haït, Idwa, Ouwa, etc., etc. El-Bitwi, qu'on retrouve ici dans le texte en tout cas, quelques indices ethnonymiques, Nisba, berbère construite sur base ethnonymique. Là, on a des classiques de la monastic arabe, berbère. Al-Yafrani, Al-Znati, Al-Jazouli, Al-Hawari, Al-Zarwili, Al-Snhaji, Al-Masmoudi, Al-Majasi, Al-Janiari, Al-Mangellati. Alors, je suis content de l'avoir ici parce que, bon, Mangellat, on sait où ça se trouve, en Kabylie, et on ne trouve pas aussi facilement cette nisba dans des sources aussi anciennes. On le trouve, bien sûr, mais peut-être plus postérieures. On a chez Ibn al-Qunfuz al-Qasantini 2-3 occurrences de al-Mangellati. Encore une petite liste d'indices ethnonymiques construits sur la base d'ethnonymes. Al-Awrabi, qui est une ramification tribale des Bérénis. Al-Ajisi, nisba tiré de Ajiz, tribu située dans le Hodna et le Djourjoura, en Algérie. Al-Koutami, connu le terme. Al-Warlisi, nisba tiré de Warlis, tribu située dans le Djourjoura, entre autres choses. Al-Yaznasi, on en parlera, c'est assez bien. Al-Yaznesni, ramification tribale des Znata. Al-Zawawi, aussi une tribu connue. Al-Arsawi, ramification tribale des Roumara. Là, on est déjà plus au Maghreb, dans la partie occidentale de l'Afrique du Nord. Al-Roumari, connu. Al-Madiouni, très connu, ramification tribale ici des Fatin. Une autre liste, Al-Fishtali, ramification tribale des Senaja. Al-Birzali, Al-Bitwa'i, Al-Doukali, Doukala Asfi, au Maroc, entre autres, dans la région, bien sûr, la macro-région, Al-Marawi, Al-Mazjaldi et Al-Wattasi. Et le dernier terme ici rappelle un petit peu ce que j'évoquais très brièvement il y a 5 minutes, Al-Wariyajli et Al-Wariyajli, Ra-Jim, ramification tribale des Yemmalak. Ici, je n'ai pas tranché, je n'ai pas autorité. Renseignements toponymiques, nom de lieu berbère. Alors, ce qui apparaît maintenant est tout à fait susceptible d'être critiqué, d'être condamné et même d'être rejeté. Ce sont simplement des choses que j'ai ici recueillies après une lecture exhaustive de la source. Celle-là, un soloï en phénicien, promontoire rocheux, il y a encore ici un point d'interrogation. Alors, ce qui m'intéresserait ici, c'est de m'arrêter 2 minutes, si vous le voulez bien, sur Marrakech, un pays de Dieu, sous la protection de Dieu. Je sais que ça a fait couler beaucoup d'encre. Des collègues ont proposé un certain nombre d'explications étymologiques. Abdallah Bonfour de l'INALCO et le professeur ex-ministre ou ministre Ahmed Tawfiq. Je vous rappelle simplement, si vous le voulez bien, ça me fait moi un peu plaisir, bon, je ne sais pas pourquoi, mais c'est curieux, la curieuse définition du géographe oriental, puisqu'il ne faut pas oublier aussi les sources orientales. Yaqut al-Rumi, qui est un géographe d'Orient qui est mort en 1229, qui nous dit dans son Kitab al-Buldan, le livre des pays, Marrakech, ma'anahu bil-barbarien asra' al-mashi. Marrakech, son sens en berbère est il faut accélérer le pas. Et pourquoi il dit ça? Il dit ça simplement parce qu'on lui a dit probablement qu'à Marrakech, il n'y a que des voleurs. Alors il faut faire attention, il ne faut pas traîner. On passe par Marrakech, mais on n'y reste pas. Il faut faire très attention, selon lui, bien sûr. Bon, évidemment, il s'agit là d'une construction culturelle qui est, je crois, complètement décontextualisée et, bien évidemment, d'après le pauvre Yaqut al-Rumi, méconnaissant vraisemblablement cette partie concrète de l'Afrique du Nord occidentale. Mazouna. Bon, berbère, Mazouna, bon là ici c'est pareil, c'est avec un point d'interrogation. Latin, Masuna, Massina, vous le voyez, il y a encore pas mal de points d'interrogation. Touat, avec peut-être un sens général de lieu habité. Alors je suis ici très intéressé aussi par le Wadi Tifelfelet et le Wadi Bet, désignation par une formule hybride, arabe berbère, on a Wadi plus le toponyme, ou l'hydronyme, pardon, de 2 cours d'eau, ou 2 cours d'eau situés donc dans la macro-région de Fès. Encore quelques renseignements toponymiques, nisba berbère construite à partir de noms de lieux, connus, Al-Tazi, nisba géographique tiré du toponyme Taza au Maroc, Al-Bija'i, nisba géographique tiré du macro-toponyme Jaya Fidzer en Algérie, Al-Tawzari, un nisba géographique tiré du macro-toponyme Tozer en Tunisie, connu, il se trouve au sud, c'est presque le Jérid, Gafsa ou Tozer. Et on a aussi un toponyme qu'on rencontre pas très souvent dans les sources écrites en arabe, c'est Al-Skundari, Skuntari, nisba géographique, du micro-toponyme Zgundar, qui est une cité minière du Haut-Atlas très connue, qui apparaît de temps en temps dans les sources écrites en arabe. Alors, des renseignements toponymiques encore, on a ici de lieu, à partir de nom de lieu, pardon, al-Wanšarīsī, comme le nom de l'auteur, bien sûr, je ne reviens pas là-dessus, al-Massili, nisba géographique tirée du macrotoponyme Msila, en Algérie. Al-Makoudi, nisba géographique probablement tirée du toponyme kabyle Makouda, situé entre Tizi Ouzou et Tixirt. Et on a un hyper connu, un toponyme, une nisba très connue, là, de Tadili, nisba géographique tirée de Tadla, au Maroc. Et bien que ainsi, je ne m'arrête pas, c'est connu, bien sûr. Quelques renseignements toponymiques encore, à partir du nom de lieu. El-Jadiri, nisba géographique probablement tirée du mot berbère, probablement, bien sûr, ce sont que des propositions. Agadir, mur, rempart naturel, avec point d'interrogation, et peut-être une connexion avec le terme Agadir. Mais attention, le terme Agadir, comme nom de lieu ou comme nom de micro-site, est aussi présent en Algérie, en Maroc, mais aussi présent en Algérie. Al-Washtati, nisba géographique tirée du microtoponyme Washtata, peut-être la tribu des Washtatan, ou Shtatan, située non loin de l'actuelle frontière tuniso-algérienne. C'est ce que j'ai trouvé en tout cas dans une certaine bibliographie. Al-Tazridri, nisba géographique tirée du macrotoponyme Tazradra, dans la région d'Ejbel Romara, au Maroc, au nord du Maroc. Zemouri, c'est un toponyme qui est très connu, nisba géographique tirée du microtoponyme Zemour, Tazamurt, que l'on trouve dans plusieurs sites nord-africains, même en Mauritanie, j'en connais au moins un, Maroc, Algérie. Alors, j'ai ici, pour le plaisir, simplement, ça n'intéressera peut-être personne, je ne sais pas, une Miscellanea Barbarica et Arabica. Alors, bon, pardonnez-moi peut-être la provocation ici, il y avait quelques petites choses que j'avais repérées, comme par exemple le nom Ibn Wesh, je ne sais pas ce que c'est, Al-Qaijati, cette nisba est probablement l'équivalent du nom de métier fromager en langue romane, Keijero, et Al-Wazrawali, Al-Qassantini, je l'ai ici noté parce que on a deux versions, Al-Qassantini et Al-Qassamtini, Nun Mim, deux versions de la nisba toponymique renvoyant au macrotoponyme Constantine en Algérie. J'ai même relevé au cours de ces derniers mois 6 versions du terme du toponyme de la nisba Constantine. Bab Kassata, espace topographique situé dans la région de Tlemcen. Al-Qouri, nisba géographique tiré du microtoponyme Cura, je ne sais pas. Al-Niji, nisba géographique tiré du microtoponyme Nija, aussi encore ici un point d'interrogation. Al-Shawiya, alors les connaisseurs du Maroc et spécialistes de ces questions-là auront reconnu bien entendu qu'il s'agit ici d'une référence à la tribu arabe des nomades Shawiya, dont les principaux centres de peuplement, mais non exclusifs bien sûr, sont les régions de Temesna, Anfa, Casa, Blanca et Stat au Maroc. Bien, alors en guise de colophon, mais colophon vraiment très provisoire, il s'agit simplement comme on dit en anglais, de glimpses. Alors les Wafayette, un ouvrage apte à ressusciter des savants disparus, probablement, et en plus des savants qui ont peut-être essaimé un certain savoir à des moments très précis. N'oublions pas qu'ils appartiennent au XIVe, au XVe et au début du XVIe siècle. Les Wafayette, un répertoire susceptible de présenter des illustres inconnus. Alors, ici, je voudrais m'arrêter une petite seconde pour dire simplement que on a bien entendu évoqué une multitude, on peut évoquer ici une multitude de biographies, petite biographie de gens peut-être sans importance, mais ce qui est intéressant, c'est qu'on peut faire un autre type d'étude qui serait une étude prosopographique. C'est une collection de biographies. On étudie ces gens-là pour leur connexion entre eux. On peut les réunir parce qu'ils sont tous spécialistes du fiqh, du droit musulman, de la religion, etc. etc. Les Wafayat, une source intéressante pour compléter, un truc exceptionnel, mais pour compléter nos connaissances sur le nomastique berbère. Les Wafayat, un texte pouvant aider à l'étude des valeurs du nom berbère, du nom propre berbère peut-être, je ne sais pas, éléments courts, syntaxe nominale, syntaxe verbale, etc. etc. Cette étude, dans la mesure des possibilités, devrait ou devra être complétée à l'aide d'écrits contemporains des XVIe et XVIIe siècles. Je pense notamment au Marocain Ibn Razi et son Rawd al-Hatoun, al-Souma'i, Kitab al-Mu'za, et Ibn Aishoun, par exemple, et d'autres textes. Bien entendu, vous avez été une petite orientation bibliographique, mais ici, ce n'est pas très utile. Vous avez été très patient et je vous remercie pour votre attention.
Merci beaucoup, Mohamed. Non, vous avez été encore largement dans le temps. Vous avez quelques minutes encore, donc ça laisse. Voilà. Donc la première, Tassadit. Oui, s'il vous plaît. Merci. Il faut l'allumer. La chambre de savoir. Faut pas l'éteindre. Non, moi je la fais comme ça. Non, c'est parti. Donc vous voulez savoir quelle langue parlait-il? Un instant.
Ça va là? Donc je voulais savoir quelle langue pratiquait-il lui-même. Je crois savoir que al-Wanšarīsī, ça vient de l'Ouarse-Nice et que ça restait une tribu berbérophone jusque très récemment. Ensuite, Tifilfel existe dans l'Aurès, dans ta région, et d'ailleurs, il y a une prison de femmes pendant la guerre, et c'est inventé parce qu'il n'y a pas de prison de femmes en Algérie, et donc c'est la première prison de femmes qui s'appelle Tifilfel dans l'Aurès, et ça tu devrais voir ça. Ensuite, al-Wanšarīsī, c'est plutôt du côté de Béjaïa que Djurdjura. Et d'ailleurs, il y a un savant qui s'appelle al-Wanšarīsī. D'accord. Ensuite, par rapport à Gorem, tu dis, enfin, c'est écrit pieux à 7, mais en réalité, c'est ce qu'on peut dire en quelque sorte un marabout local berbère, qui est à la fois effectivement saint, mais qui est aussi soigneur. C'est celui qui fait rentrer les garçons dans la virilité. C'est lui qui coupe la première coupe de cheveux. Et là, c'est justement notre ami Taufer qui me l'avait pris. Donc, quand les garçons quittent le monde féminin pour... Et c'est donc le Agorem qui leur coupe... voilà. Et donc, c'est un saint, oui, mais ce n'est pas un saint religieux musulman. Voilà. C'est un saint autochtone, local, qui connaît... qui a des bribes de Coran, mais Agorem, tout féminin, ça existe jusqu'à maintenant dans le sud-est marocain. Ensuite, Amour Niakouch, Amour, littéralement, c'est la part. Amouréou, c'est l'équivalent de Haqq en arabe. Amour, Niakouch, donc effectivement, le pays de Dieu, c'est le sens second, pas le sens premier, de Amour Tamour, donc voilà. Ben voilà ce que j'avais à dire, et merci encore. Et il y a donc d'autres manuscrits, je ne sais pas, à la même période. Il y a un type qui s'appelle d'ailleurs Zawawi, ou je ne sais pas quoi, qui avait travaillé sur l'irrigation, qui se trouve en Andalousie, entre autres. Et donc cette période-là, effectivement, très 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 riche en manuscrits, on trouve... voilà, merci. En tout cas, j'ai constaté qu'il n'y avait pas de femmes. Des femmes, il n'y en avait pas. Et pourtant,
merci infiniment pour ces additions qui sont absolument précieuses pour moi. Je vous remercie. Et quant à savoir si Ahmad bin Yahya al-Wanšarīsī parlait, quelle langue il parlait, j'imagine qu'il parlait le berbère ou quelques bribes de berbère, mais ce qui est sûr, c'est qu'il était arabisé, puisque toute sa production est écrite en arabe, bien sûr. Mais ce qui est quand même curieux, c'est l'intérêt qu'il a de conserver ces matériaux, ces quelques matériaux en berbère, qui ne sont peut-être pas des matériaux forcément exceptionnels, comme je l'ai dit au début, mais qui nous permettent de compléter nos corpus toponymique, ethnonymique et anthroponymique. Et ce n'est pas dans tous les textes arabes qu'on trouve des nisbas comme al-Arsawi, al-Menkellati par exemple. On va dire, oui, aussi on trouve beaucoup ça, mais on trouve beaucoup ça aux époques tardives. Oui, mais pour le 15e ou le 16e, c'est pas aussi facile que ça de pêcher ce genre de données dans les sources. Merci encore, Tassadit Yassine, pour ces précisions. Merci.
D'autres questions? Oui. Oui, bien sûr.
Une question, tout simplement, je suis curieux de savoir ces textes anciens en berbère, quelle aurait été leur influence ou bien dans quelle mesure ces textes auraient jeté les bases ou encore formulé différemment, quelles seraient les traces de ces études sur ce qu'on pourrait appeler une littérature contemporaine dans le Maghreb.
Alors, si vous me le permettez, ces textes-là ne sont pas en berbère.
Oui.
Ce sont des textes qui sont en arabe dans leur majorité, je veux dire au niveau du volume, du contenu, mais il y a d'importants éléments en berbère. Alors, il y a un type de texte qui va contenir énormément de matériaux en berbère, d'autres textes comme celui-là qui comportent quelques bribes, mais il m'a paru intéressant parce que c'était de le présenter. Il est connu, mais c'était intéressant, je crois, de le présenter parce que, justement, c'est un genre littéraire qui est peu pratiqué, le genre nécrologique. Alors, l'influence maintenant sur une littérature contemporaine berbère, j'imagine qu'elle a eu, mais il faut aller plutôt travailler sur les textes qui ont énormément de matériaux en berbère. Je pense notamment aux textes de poésie. Peut-être que Tassadit Yassine ou Mena Lafkioui ou Vermondo Brunatelli peuvent peut-être en dire plus sur cette question. Il y a, bien sûr... Oui. Oui. En berbère, oui. Alors, oui, mais le volume dépend du genre historiographique sur lequel on travaille. Bien évidemment, dans les littératures juridiques, on va trouver peu de choses. La littérature juridique classique, bien sûr, les livres de Fatawa, comme j'en ai parlé là, on va trouver quelques bribes. Et il faut lire toutes les 2000 pages ou 3000 pages qu'il y a pour essayer de trouver quelque chose, ou les 400 pages ou 300 pages. Cela dépend, je pense, de la littérature, du type le genre historiographique.
Une autre question ou commentaire ou addition? Oui, bien sûr, Vermondo.
Bon, c'est un sujet très intéressant. Votre travail, c'est très précieux parce qu'il faut glaner, comme vous le dites, dans de grands textes. Il y a évidemment des problèmes. Il y en a un tas, surtout étant donné qu'il n'y avait pas un standard de l'écriture du berbère. Donc, par exemple, j'ai vu le Mangaletti, c'est écrit le G, c'est écrit avec un K. Tandis que c'était quoi, Agadir, c'était écrit avec un jim, parce que évidemment l'écriture arabe n'a pas le son gai, alors il y a des façons. Je me demande s'il y a, si on a trouvé dans ces toponymes et onomastiques une certaine cohérence, surtout étant donné qu'il, Van den Bogert avait esquissé un peu les traits principaux de la façon de transcrire le berbère. Il avait divisé la façon la plus ancienne et celle la plus récente, celle avec le matres lectionis, avec les consonnes à la place des voyelles, ou sinon avec voyellisation très, très poussée. Je me demande justement si dans ce texte on peut trouver une cohérence, un standard graphique, ou si il s'agit de choses pour trouver ça et là. Puis chaque nom que vous avez cité, le plein de réminiscences, de choses, on pourrait passer une journée à en discuter, donc c'est pas la peine. À propos tout seulement de Chaouia, je me suis dit, Chaouia, normalement c'est le nom qu'on utilise maintenant pour parler de l'Aurès, de population de l'Aurès, mais en effet c'est un mot arabe qui signifie berger, donc il faut savoir évidemment, si vous avez dit que ça c'est en référence à un certain lieu, ça veut dire que vous avez les indications biographiques de ce monsieur qui avait ce nom, qui ne provenait pas de l'Aurès mais du Maroc. De toute façon, merci beaucoup parce que c'est toujours très intéressant de vous écouter.
Merci Fernando pour ces observations, ces additions. À propos de la cohérence dans la transcription, dans la restitution de termes tels que, je me rappelle que men kellati, je l'ai trouvé avec kaf. Simplement une fois, peut-être une ou deux occurrences, mais avec kaf, dans le texte en question, dans le texte examiné. Ça tombe bien, puisque j'ai jeté un coup d'œil aussi, j'ai rejeté un coup d'œil dans Ibn Ghazi et dans d'autres textes contemporains, plus ou moins contemporains, et là on a 2 jusqu'à 3 versions différentes, al-man kellati, al-man ghallati et al-man jallati. Alors, c'est intéressant. Moi, je ne suis pas qualifié, d'une certaine manière, pour proposer la plus ou moins contemporaine, le terme le plus ancien au terme le plus récent, si vous voulez, mais il y a au moins une possibilité, là, de commencer un petit travail, voilà, une ébauche de travail sur les graphiques. Merci.
Alors, je vais me permettre quand même de rajouter quelque chose, puisque c'est quand même mon domaine aussi, et une question. Donc, les choses concernant la graphie qui ont été soulevées, je suis tout à fait d'accord, mais c'est plus complexe que ça. Donc, on a une face, d'un côté, on a donc la non-standardisation des graphies, et donc tout auteur écrit comme il veut. Comme le cas du « ge », est-ce que c'est un « ge » ou est-ce que c'est un « que » ou un « je » derrière. Mais il y a aussi la variation linguistique. Ça veut dire qu'on parle ici toujours des langues, amazigh ou berbère. Donc il y a donc qui sont historiquement, linguistiquement éloignées l'une de l'autre. Donc on a comme le cas de Agadir que vous avez soulevé, Agadir et Ajdir dans le Rif. Alors, on a donc une palatalisation qui a eu lieu, c'est un phénomène historique, donc le « ge » et le « je » sont apparentés, mais en même temps, c'est des témoignages d'un processus linguistique derrière. Donc, est-ce qu'il faut homogénéiser ? Non. Ah non, non. Il s'agit c'est des reflets de langues et de stades de langues différentes. Donc ça, c'est un problème. Donc il y a un problème au niveau de l'analyse linguistique, il y a un problème au niveau de la langue et au niveau de l'écrit. Alors, mais ça, c'est la beauté de ce genre de texte. Ça, c'est mes commentaires. Je reviendrai là-dessus parce que je parlerai de Ajdir, je parlerai d'Abdkrim, et il est de Ajdir, donc il est du même toponyme d'Agadir. On est dans la même logique. Vous avez parlé d'Erwaliarli, il est d'Aïthoriarel. Donc là, vous voyez, on est un peu partout, mais en même temps, on est assez éloigné puisqu'il ne s'agit pas du même type de texte. Ce que j'aimerais savoir, peut-être, juste pour, peut-être aussi pour l'audience, nous allons dire 2 mots sur l'aspect, la dimension biographique de tout ce que vous venez de nous montrer, cette richesse, la logique biographique derrière, en fait. Peut-être, on dire 2 mots, pour vous c'est très clair, mais pour nous peut-être moins.
Merci pour ces observations, Mena, merci pour les additions. Rapidement, la problématique linguistique n'est pas est absolument indispensable à prendre en compte, bien entendu. Moi, je me contente, si j'ose dire, de récupérer, si vous voulez, de ramasser, entre guillemets, les matériaux. Je ne les modifie en rien, je ne cherche pas. Je veux dire, je ne peux pas, bien entendu, dire que ça, c'est pas la même chose qu'aujourd'hui, qu'à tel endroit, etc., etc. D'autres chercheurs plus qualifiés ou spécialistes pourront le faire jusqu'à un certain point. Non, et tout ce que vous avez évidemment commenté. Alors, quant à la perspective biographique, j'en ai peut-être pas tellement parlé, c'est vrai, mais j'y ai quand même fait allusion à la fin, et je voudrais dire que ce texte-là est un texte qui n'est pas forcément qui rentre pas forcément dans le genre biographique, mais qui rentre dans un genre qui est à la lisière de la biographie et de la nécrologie, finalement. le genre nécrologique, comme je l'ai souligné au début, était un genre prisé en Orient, peut-être pas forcément trop en Afrique du Nord. On a la chance d'avoir ce petit Kitab al-Wafayat, qui pour moi constitue malgré tout un répertoire de biographie. Elles sont brèves. On nous dit qu'il s'appelait de telle manière, qu'il était de là-bas, il est mort là, etc., etc. Alors, pour cela, j'aurais pu travailler sur des répertoires biographiques qui sont plus conséquents, qui sont plus nombreux. Il y a énormément de répertoires biographiques pour l'Afrique du Nord, l'Andalousie, l'Andalous et l'Orient, c'est encore pire. Mais bon, je me serais peut-être un peu noyé. Et puis surtout, dire des choses qui avaient déjà été dites, et puis surtout déjà publiées, si vous voulez. Je pense, c'est peut-être un risque aussi, que travailler sur ces Wafayat, bon, c'était peut-être pas forcément très original, mais en tout cas peu connu. Mais vous avez raison de souligner, bien sûr, quelle est la perspective. C'est un élément peut-être à la lisière, mais il rentre en contact, en connexion avec la biographie, et surtout dans mon cas, dans ce cas-là, la prosopographie, la collection des biographies. Merci.
Très bien, merci beaucoup. Moi, je crois que c'est très fascinant et ça permet de nouveau de mettre, peut-être pas en question, mais réfléchir davantage sur les notions, le concept de biographie, autobiographie, qu'est-ce que ça couvre, la part du contexte dedans, la part, est-ce qu'il y a des traits formels, très clairs ou pas, tout ça. Même si pour certains tout est clair, je crois que ça l'est loin de l'être. Tout petit, et c'est à moi après.
C'est aussi un clin d'œil aux communications qui ont été faites entre hier et aujourd'hui. Je pense notamment à la communication de Nafisa, la communication de Annunziata, la communication de notre collègue égyptologue, Emanuele Ciampini, dans le sens où le type de sources utilisées, des sources très concrètes, réfléchir aussi sur cette notion de genre historiographique. Réfléchir. Merci.
Voilà. So it's my turn. I think I don't need to be introduced anymore after that wonderful introduction of Eileen yesterday. Perhaps just saying that I'm full professor holding a chair at the École des études en sciences sociales in Paris, a chair in Amazigh linguistics. I'm also research director at the Centre National de Recherche Scientifique in Paris, and my research focuses on Afro-Asiatics, ou cas mytho-sémitique en français, with a special focus on Tamazight and Semitic. I'm a linguist, social linguist, and linguistic anthropologist. We'll also do I've worked much also on literature, oral literature, African literature, and yeah, that's it in a nutshell. So today, as you can see, I chose a picture. So my title is Abd Karim, or Abd Karim, a never-ending biographical narrative of a unique Amazigh leader. So as you can see, I chose a picture of Abd Karim, or Abd Karim, as I say in Tarifit, enjoying a good espresso, not only because we're in Italy and God knows how much Italians enjoy good coffee, me too, but also because I wanted to start this paper as a tribute to him, not only as a remarkable historical figure, but also as a refined human being. So from the Rif, North Morocco, where coffee drinking is, as in Italy, a concept. So my paper discusses the biography of this emblematic political and military Amazigh leader, Abd Karim, alias Mohamed Abd Karim al-Khattabi, aka Moulay Mohamed, born in Ajdir, so the same Agadir, which Meouak just, but in a completely other area. Among the Ethiopian, another toponym, in the Rif, so in North Morocco in 1882. He died while in exile in Cairo on February 6th in 1963, so exactly 60 years ago this week. He was the leader of the resistance in the Moroccan People's Army for Liberation during the Rif War against French and Spanish colonization. And he was also the founder and president of the Republic of the Rif. His extraordinary warfare tactics and organizational skills made him a hero, not only in North Africa, but worldwide. And I will give you some evidence of that. The study will focus on how Abd Karim's biography has been constantly created and recreated while he was alive and after his death by comparing the different narratives fashioned for that purpose. The narratives include, for instance, literary texts such as poetry, prose, and historical texts, mostly relating to administration, and come in all kinds of formats, such as oral, written, and recently also digital multimodal formats. So they will also account for the importance of the historical figure of Abd Karim, for the Amazigh claim, so the current Amazigh claim, by showing how his biography contributes nowadays to the formation of Amazigness, that is the transnational and post-colonial Amazigh collective identity. Data presented in this paper will show that Abd Karim's biography is cyclical, in that the documented historical facts and narratives regarding him are constantly recycled in current social, cultural, and political narratives, which altogether shape the narrated life of this exceptional figure of the Amazigh contemporary history. So this is a map depicting the Rif area, which corresponds to the whole area dominated by the Rif mountain in Morocco and stretches from Araish in the west to the Moroccan-Algerian border in the east and from the Mediterranean till the corridor of Taza. Abd Karim was born in Ajdir in the 8th Yusuf Wari faction of the 8th Wayaghar, one of the most known Amazigh tribes of the Rif area and of North Africa, and at that time also one of the most densely populated areas. He stemmed from an influential family, as his father was a Qadi, Islamic judge, appointed in 1880 by Moulay Hassan I. And the fact that his father had also socio-political ties with Spanish military authorities made his family gain certain international influence and benefits. It was indeed in this context that his son, Abd Karim, as normally it's Mohan Abd Karim, so Mohan's son of Abd Karim, but everyone calls him Abd Karim, got a teaching position or teaching post in Melilla, the enclave, at a primary school in 96, which he kept till 1913. He was also a reporter in the same enclave for the daily newspaper El Telegrama del Rif, wherein he wrote in Arabic till 1915. In addition, he held the position of secretary-interpreter in the Native Affairs Office in Melilla, which allowed him to get to know Spanish military bureaucracy and civil society thoroughly. This is an important fact for what I'm going to say. So, during his Spanish service, he was known for his intelligence, competence, and high moral values, and this is all documented. So, before holding these positions, Abd Karim studied Islamic law and classic Arabic language and literature at Al-Qarawiyyin in Fas, considered the world's oldest university. Before that, he also went to Al-Attarin, Al-Safarin madrasas, also in Fas. During the Spanish protectorate, as from 1912, he was named not only Qadi, just as his father was before him, but Qadi al-Qadat in Melilla, that is the chief Islamic judge, which brought him much influence, but at the same time also much pressure from Spain, who wanted him and his family to facilitate the so-called pacification of the Central Rif. Their former agreement with Spain, so that pacification agreement, became difficult during World War I, as Abd Karim's father violated Spain neutrality, monitored by French authorities, by supporting German and Arab dealings. Abd Karim was interrogated about it and incarcerated for 1 year, from September 1950 to August 1916, for anti-Spanish beliefs. So this changed everything in the Rif history, this incarceration, because even after his release, so 1 year of imprisonment, Spain, and indirectly also France, where France was always monitoring the whole war scene, kept pressuring him to go back to the pacification agreement of the Central Rif, which made him leave his judgeship, his Qadi al-Qadat, call his brother back from his engineering studies in Madrid, join his father in Agadir, so in Agadir the same in the Rif, and sever all ties with Spain in 1920. Meanwhile, so this is all pre-Rif war period. Meanwhile, he organized, so meanwhile severing all ties, he organized an anti-colonial resistance movement in the Central Rif area, also called the Rif War, which peaked with the Battle of Anwel on the 22nd of July in 1921. The Rif War or Rif resistance took quickly back all the eastern part of the Rif that Spain took since 1999. In that battle, Spain lost more than 10,000 troops and much weaponry. Spanish commander General Manuel Fernández Silvestre also took his life when he knew that he was defeated, something that is still commemorated in many memorials. Abd Karim's crushing victory has put him and his Rif movement in the international political arena once and for all, and he was considered back then and still to be the fighter and hero against European colonialism by the international left, mainly socialists, between brackets, as well as in the Islamic world. He was regarded as the master of guerrilla warfare, a knowledgeable and foresighted strategist and leader. Till today, Abd Karim is considered to be the Mujahid, or the Mujahid, so the war or resistance leader of the Rif. Some clippings that account for this are shown on this side. So here we have on the left, so this is the right side, yeah. On the right side, a caricature called A la Mona in Spanish, which appeared in 1920. And so before the famous Battle of Anwel. So, and it says, aquí les traigo la sopa di moda. Y como le han puesto, sopa la Abd Karim. Es el último grifo. So here I bring you the soup. And how is it served? It's soup a la Abd Karim. It is the latest fashion. So, and it appeared in Revistas Ejército, so which is not just a small revista. On an even bigger revista on the right side of the slide, we have him, so his head, on the cover of the Time in 1925. On next slide, we can see him, and I'm sorry because the picture is a small one, and yeah, we can see, but you can spot Che Guevara and King Farouk in Cairo in 1959. So impressed by Abd Karim and his guerrilla war, Che wanted to meet him back then. And he got to know about him through Alberto Bayon, and this is also documented, who participated in the Rif War and sympathized with the Rifians. And so he was a Republican during the Spanish War in 1936 against Franco. He was also in the resistance movement during World War II, and he was also very fighting together with Fidel and Raúl Castro and Che in Mexico. So it is known that it is Bayo, so it is Spanish ex-military guy, who introduced the whole Castro family and Che into guerrilla warfare, which he himself got to know during the Rif War. So this all is also taken up and recontextualized many years after in an article published 10 years ago, which appeared in the leftist magazine Contretemps in memoriam of Abd Karim again. So this is an article 10 years ago, which has been reframed again even this week. This week, 60 years after 60 weeks of in memoriam commemorating Abd Karim, 60 years after his death, and it is reframed and diffused on social media in different ways, in many ways, and these are just some clippings 10 years later. And you can see on the left side a tweet where you can see the same thing and in English, and on the right side you have a clipping from a Facebook clipping, which says in Tarifit, in language, it says, Abd Karim I Sakan Thagdudan Narif Stinis Gusa Zgwemi, which means, in memoriam, Abd Karim, who founded the Republic of the Rif 60 years ago, and then is implied he died. And then it refers to the article I just shown you. So it is recontextualized in different ways, and in different ideological contexts, which I'll explain in a bit. So here are some more clippings in memoriam of Abd Karim, expressed in various languages of the world and for different social, cultural, and political reasons. So in the left upper corner, there's a post of him. It is a post of him in a kind of collage on YouTube, where he's called Amrar Mohen, because that's how he's generally also called in Tamazight of the Rif, which means Chief Mohammed. And it was made a couple of years ago, and this collage gets also again recycled in different discourses for different purposes. And interesting, it is all these pictures and small videos of that time are remastered and accompanied by a current song dedicated to him by Tidrine Band. So this video, for instance, is posted by an Amazigh activist. And you can see that if you go into detail in these texts, who's not only pro-Rif, but also in favor of the Pan-Amazigh claim. And it is, one cannot see that if one is not into the language and all the sort of social linguistic context in which all these texts appear. But it is, language plays a very important role here, as language is one, if not the marker of the Amazigh collective claim, so the identity marker by excellence. And it is reflected in his language use, because it's not only used as previously, let's say, a local variety of Tarifit, but there's a big effort in choosing the words, using a lot of neologisms even, and in order to connect with that Pan-Amazigh claim, which overarches the whole of North Africa. So, and he says, for those who understand Tarifit, Sumchtheu, and then he tries to translate commemoration, Numerway, leader, Nig, and Sumchtheu, Numerway, Nar, Moulay Mohand, Adawdri, Wafsa, and Videoya. So, in commemoration of this, our leader, Moulay Mohand, will diffuse again this video. So this is not the case at all in the clipping in the right lower corner, which presents the same video but translated into Dutch. and posted by arifnews.com, which is a Dutch-based pro-Rif news group with a variety of members, among which also separatists. So it's a very mixed group, and it's a very interesting group to study, but it can have some dangerous implications too nowadays. So I'll come back to that in a while. It is an interesting thing, and I'll come back to that because it's translated into Dutch, and I will give you some explanations. In the upper right side, we have a post on Amazon USA, and Amazon USA is a news group, and it has also Twitter, Facebook, and so on. And it retakes a post of Amazon News, and again, you can see here on social media, and it's got a lot of hits, mainly in English, and even all kinds of Amazigh from the diaspora or from North Africa, exchange about it and generally support this kind of action. In the right lower corner, we have another clipping, a kind of makeover of Che Guevara, because you can see Che Guevara wearing a beret with the flag of the Republic of the Rif. That's not Che Guevara's hair thing. So, referring to the connection between the Rif War and Che's war against Western imperialism and colonialism. So, this is a subtle way if you're not into these matters. And it says in French this time, and this is what Che has supposedly said when he saw the Rif area. He says, en survolant le Rif en avion, j'ai regardé par le hublot, la région est une zone idéale pour la guérilla. C'est tout un symbole. So, God knows if it's true, but anyway, this is what is stated. So, let's go to the Tegdudena Rif, the Republic, which is also called, or the Republic of the Rif. So, at the home front in the Rif, in the beginning, it wasn't that easy to get support from the whole area for Abdelkrim, for which many oral testimonies account. And unfortunately, I don't have the time for that because I have poetry in rhyme, in prose that accounts for that. And especially when it came to establishing the Republic, which was declared on September 18th, 1921, but formally constituted in 1923, with Abdelkrim as head of state or president. The Republic, which had its own flag, and that's the flag, so reproduced on Che's beret, existed from 1921 to 1927, and its cabinet was mainly composed of Abdelkrim's relatives and inner circle. By 1922, Spain had taken most of the territory that it had lost in 1921, but given the unstable political situation in Spain under the Restoration regime, war continued, and peace negotiations were rejected by Abdelkrim, demanding sovereignty. It is by 1925, he controlled 3/4 of the Spanish protectorate. So he got 3/4 back from the area taken at that time. During his rule, he installed a centralized bureaucracy, a fighting force, a Muslim legal code, international trade contracts, and a whole transportation or transport and telecommunication network. In other words, a whole reformed, modern, well-functioning state with its own government. His rule even reached across the French protectorate up to Teza and Fez, so two very important urban centers at that time, also for the supply lines of the Republic. So more than 6,000 French troops were taken down for that purpose. Touching French colonial territories surely was ambitious and fruitful, as he wanted to preserve the safety and development of his newly established republic. and also through international diplomatic exchanges. But at the same time, entering French territory was also the beginning of the Republic's downfall. As the two colonial powers, France and Spain, coordinated a neatly calculated joint offensive in September 1925, with the Spanish disembarking about 18,000 troops at El-Hoceima, so in the north, Morocco, and the French some 20,000 troops into the south of Morocco in Spanish protectorate, so closing them down, like sandwich, like a hot dog, while Abd Karim's resistant force counted about 30,000. But it is not only the fact that the Rif Amazigh fighters were outnumbered that caused the defeat of the Republic. So the combined army of over 250,000 men to overpower the Rif, not more than 30,000, was not enough. Two other most important facts played an essential role in its defeat, although they are generally left out in the local history school books, in Morocco especially, but elsewhere too, as well as in many academic circles still, because they are very touchy topics, touchy points. The first touchy point is the fact that both France, under commandment of Maréchal Henri-Philippe Pétain, because Lyoté was too soft, considered to be soft under Pétain, and Spain had significant backup from the local central powers, mainly the Sultan, local notables, especially from Fez, and the Marsan itself, which had no interest in the Rif cause and felt even threatened by its power. So in fact, the Sultanate and the whole Fessi bourgeoisie were generally against the Rif war at that time, and still are, although it is Abd Karim and his Rif war that were the precursors of Moroccan nationalism, on which the Istiqlal Party, the Independence Party, one of that is the central party of, based its movement after the independence, even if not all party members gave him credit for that. So as a matter of fact, Abd Karim's movement and rule not only inspired the Moroccan, North African, and other areas of the world to resist European rule, but also has shown how to build a nation state with a modern government in a rural area, because that was the Rif area at that moment. The second important point is one of the military know-how that the combined colonial powers used during the Rif war is that of chemical weapons, which were used several times between 1921 and 1927 by the Spanish Army of Africa, mainly, but not only. So dropping toxic gas bombs, which targeted civilians, followed right after Spain's huge defeat at the Battle of Anwell in 1921, as a kind of retribution, even after Spain had signed the Geneva Protocol that prohibited the use of chemical and biological weapons in international conflict. France supported Spain in her chemical war by providing smaller gas agents, while Germany provided clandestinely heavier chemical agents. And all that is also documented, and lately some publications appeared, and I will take that up in the text version of my paper. So these ex-colonial powers have still not been tried for their war crimes, and they didn't even officially apologize for it yet. So I think there's much to apologize for worldwide, and this is one of the cases. So here we have the film Iperita. We are in that cyclical biography, Iperita by Mohamed Meouak, which relates the life of José, a retired soldier from the Spanish Air Force, who had witnessed the bombing and dropping of mustard gas on many civilian groups during the Rif war. So 60 years later, this former Spanish soldier decides to return to the scene of crime and discovers a large part of the population infected with cancers and living in a grim landscape, by which he is deeply touched. So I don't have the time to do that, but this is, so Abd Karim, of course, there's the connection with Abd Karim directly, and it is taken up differently and different at different times in this movie. So this is a very famous picture of Abd Karim when he was interviewed by the Libertad in 1925 while he was the president of the Republic of the Rif. Let's say the third part of this biography, if we can call it like that. On May 27, 1926, Abd Karim surrendered himself to the French, which was covered internationally in much detail. As you can see on some of these clippings, you can see on here he's taking the train, from Fès to Casablanca to get shipped to Marseille, and from there to l'île La Réunion. So he and his whole family were shipped in 1947. After having, and we can see after having him allowed to relocate to France for health reasons, and while on his way to southern France, a group of Moroccan nationalists took him and his family from their ship in Port Said and led them to Cairo, where they got asylum from King Farouk. It isn't clear whether they were taken against their wishes, or at least not by their knowledge, or not at all. So during his stay in Egypt, and then the second picture, so that's where he was in Egypt, Abd Karim joined the Liberation Committee of the Arab West, the Maghreb, but left the group shortly after in 1950. However, he wrote many articles and gave many interviews against European colonialism and for North Africa's and Africa's liberation during his stay in Egypt. After independence of Morocco in 1956, Abd Karim was implored to come back, even by King Mohamed V, but never agreed to, as he considered Morocco and North Africa still under French and Spanish control, as long as there is a military presence of these colonial powers on the territory. Abd Karim gave his support to the Rif revolts of 1958 and 1959, so many years after the Rif War, during which the Rif area mainly, but not only, became a victim of a huge power struggle following independence between the monarchy, supported by France, and the Istiqlal Party, the Parti d'Indépendance, a struggle that is still ongoing somehow. So these two main actors monopolized the political arena, dividing the power between them by controlling the armed forces and the bureaucracy left by the French. So by a mean and ruthless strategy that is triggering rebellions in rural areas, first in the south of Morocco and later also in the Rif, Prince Moulay Hassan, which later became King Hassan II, expelled the Istiqlal Party by asserting the crown as the restorer of order by declaring martial law and military intervention. So in the Rif, the monarchy couldn't suppress the revolt, especially once an organized army movement started in the Ixinay and Ethiopian area, and the Ethiopian area is the same area as where Abd Karim came from. And especially when a young Rifian graduate from Al-Qarawiyyin, so the same university, called Mohamed Ambrosiana, directed his movement. Mohamed Ambrosiana, he personified everything that went wrong after the independence. He deserves another biography. And he directed that movement, not only because it was needed, but also he has as his example Abd Karim, who he not only admired, but also whose ideas he tried to transmit. So the monarchy, the Parti d'Indépendance, the Istiqlal, and even France and Spain were afraid of another war, another Rif war, and started punitive expeditions under the command of Prince Moulay Hassan. And even if the rebels were poorly armed and outnumbered, some 2,000 men, including Abdelkrim's former army, that's why I'm making the link, it's constantly Abdelkrim, they defeated the royal army many, many times. And it's one day succeeded to bring down the Crown Prince plane, but he survived. The Crown's repression was so ruthless that whole groups of Rif civilians, especially of the equatorial areas, or especially of the area from where Abdelkrim came from, were mowed down. So these, and they were called like that, cleaning operations, also included systematic rape and arbitrary arrests and executions, and this all with France and Spain's blessing. So quickly, I'm almost there. So these historical facts and their relationship with Abdelkrim and everything that he embodies is still important today, perhaps even more than ever. Abdelkrim is the icon of resistance, resilience, and freedom, especially within the Hirak movement. And I don't know if you have heard about Hirak, but Hirak is the popular protest movement that emerged in the Rif area, in Al-Husayma, so in the same area of Abdelkrim, and it's called Amuswa Gharfan Al-Rif, in October 2016, so it's very recent, following the death of the fishmonger Mohsin Fikri, who was crushed in a dumpster while trying to save his fish that police had discarded. So this protest movement against general social and political oppression in the Rif has spread further across North Africa, and has also had a strong presence in Algeria since 2019. So today's North African regimes apply heavy censorship and repression against anyone who shouts too loudly pro-Tamazight, especially when it is accompanied by a demand for more autonomy, as is the case amongst many activist circles in the Rif area. So you can see here the same flag reappears in, nowadays, and is used for that purpose. Here you have again, when I said the video translated in, by a Dutch-based group, I just picked it here. So Arif News is so a pro-Rif with the, I wouldn't say there are some separatists, but there are all kinds of people sustaining the Rif and Amazigh claim and cause. I just wanted to underline what is written here. So it says, so one of the texts that was, an excerpt of the text translated from the Amazigh text says that the sickle remains the same, only the handle is replaced. So, Amjad Wani Bidrnaz Fous. So, and it refers again to Moulay Mohen, to Abdelkrim. So, again, we are on the same. Much of this song takes also older texts, older poetry, and it is recontextualized in the current Rif area, but constantly referring to Abdelkrim biography. So this is me on a film set with a fake Abdelkrim. And I'm allowed to share that. I wasn't allowed to share it because I've done three months of field work in the Rif area last year. It was a very interesting but very intense moment, and at that moment I couldn't share this picture because it's for the first time that they are making a film, a biographical film about Abdelkrim, or at least till the War of Anwel and not before. And there are many, many problems. So someone leaked it, and it caused a huge, not only a social media, but it caused a huge amount of critics. And some critics are perhaps justified, others not. It comes at a very strange time, it's true, but I think it's the same. So the same of Ipirita, it's the same producer, it's the same Bouzougo. So I think there are certainly very good intentions, and I restrain myself from any comments till I'll see it, and it will be for soon. Perhaps the biggest problem, but it's something that the producer can do anything about, is that there aren't enough qualified Amazigh-speaking and Rif Amazigh-speaking people to play these roles. So the biggest problem is that Abd Karim, the role of Abd Karim, is taken by an Arabic-speaking, a Darija-speaking actor, because there is no Rif Amazigh-speaking competent enough to play at that level this role. So there's a whole discussion also about that, and that's symbolically speaking a huge problem. But this is for something another time. So two sentences, and I have to stick. I'm done. So interesting for the Amazigh claim. It's not only very specific local phenomena, local history, local, let's say, people. At that time was very international, very translocal. And nowadays, so thanks to, say, social media, thanks to digital media, is taken up, retaken up, recontextualized different ways, and used for different political, ideological purposes, but also sometimes also very, for very individual purposes. So it's very difficult sometimes to clearly see where, let's say, politics ends. And even though it is very local, it is of international importance. It is of very importance for the Amazigh claim in general. So not only symbolically speaking, but because, but also this kind of content provides that this huge Amazigh claim, which is something more cognitive. It's more in the minds of people. It's like the Ummah. It provides with real content, historical content, offline content. And in that respect, so the whole Rif question, la question rifaine, contributes directly and indirectly to what is called, what I call Amazighness. I've even published about it, or Amazighité, which is a kind of post-colonial ethnic group heavily promoted via social media, a transnational ethnic group. And I'll leave you with this picture of Abd Karim gazing at you and asking you for any questions. Thank you very much for your patience. Ho contato. So I've been bad in timing myself, so I have 5 minutes, and then I've respected my time. I've calculated it, 5 minutes, and then it's... yes, please, Pierluigi.
My first question is a curiosity. That's been the last question. But I saw among the picture you showed in the beginning, there was one portraying Abdel Karim, King Farouk, and Fidel Castro. Sorry. It was Che Guevara, apparently shot in Cairo, you said, in 1959. Yeah, exactly, because either that man was not King Farouk, or the picture has been taken elsewhere, for the simple reason that King Farouk was overthrown in 1952, and if I remember well, in 1958, his Egyptian citizenship was revoked, and I doubt he ever went back to, perhaps he went back to to Egypt before dying. I think he died in 65 in Italy, or in Italy, yes, or in France. In Italy, yeah, in Rome, obviously. So I'm a bit puzzled of that, because either, you know, something strange, and even King Farouk, yes, King Farouk used to, I still remember that, used to wear the fets, but it looks like something, either he's a younger man, or, yeah, it sounds strange to me. Yeah, simply, this is what Vermont is saying makes sense to me.
I said, it seemed to me, even I noticed the anachronism. In 59, Farouk was not in Cairo, he was in exile since many years. But looking better, I had the impression that the figure of Che Guevara was somehow è stata incollata, it was manipulated somehow. I'm not so sure that they really met. Just a bit information among the media who speak of the biography of Abdelkrim. There is also the bande dessinée, I fumetti. There is Nadrani, L'Emir by Nadrani. I have one copy at home, and I sent you by WhatsApp some images you'll find in your phone.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not vouching for the photo, but I will vouch for the sources where I get it from. But he met with him, that's for sure, and I have also references referring to that. These are the pictures, but this picture can be faked, so I'm not. But Che Guevara, he met with him, and they say with Farouk. So. For the text, I will surely get facts straight and refer to these texts which refer to that. Nadrani, I know, I met Nadrani also last year, and Nadrani is one is also behind the Abdelkrim film I just show you. So it's Nadrani and Bouzgou together who are filming Abdelkrim's biography. Can I just take the Said's question, and that we did? Yeah, I think we still have. You said 1:45, so 1:45 we still have. Yes.
Oui. Alors maintenant, moi, je voudrais te poser une question. Comment est-ce qu'on peut expliquer l'invisibilisation de l'action et de la pensée d'Abdelkrim dans le monde dit musulman? Parce que c'est celui-là où c'est important. Pourquoi? Parce que je pense que c'est le premier dans toute cette ère à donc penser à mettre en place une république.
L'un quoi? Excusez-moi, j'ai pas compris. L'un des premiers. De république, oui, tout à fait.
Voilà. Mais ça, je pense que c'est très très important. Et on en parle, disons qu'on en parle peu. Ensuite, est-ce qu'on peut considérer que c'est le premier aussi leader anticolonialiste? Ça c'est des grandes questions. Alors des petites questions qui ne sont pas des petites mais qui sont importantes puisque tu finis par ça. Je sais qu'Abdelkrim parlait le berbère. Sa famille parle le berbère, j'ai rencontré sa fille et tout ça à 2 reprises, donc il parle. Mais qu'en est-il de cette langue dans son programme? Puisqu'il a pensé à un certain nombre de choses, et puis on peut dire aussi que c'est la première république qui va aussi accorder un statut pour les Juifs. C'est nommé. Tu vois. Les Juifs? Eh oui. Donc voilà, alors voilà, donc c'est là mes questions. Alors, y a-t-il une place pour le berbère dans sa république, si elle avait... Donc il y a un statut pour les juifs, mais pour le berbère, je sais qu'il le parle et que la culture est très importante pour lui, quelle est la place de la langue. Ensuite, l'autre question, quelle est sa formation politique voilà, pour devenir un républicain? Oui, comment il s'est formé? Avec qui? Tu vois? Donc on sait que c'est un parcours sur le temps, on connaît. Mais voilà, quels sont les lieux où il s'est réalisé politiquement, où il a opté davantage pour la République? Voilà. C'est beaucoup de choses à la fois.
En fait, là, c'est pas des petites questions, c'est des grandes questions. Et moi, j'aurais pas le temps de répondre à tout, mais je le ferai volontiers à toi et on se retrouvera aussi sur le texte ou dans le texte. Tes premières questions concernant oui, il est considéré comme, je l'ai dit peut-être en anglais trop rapidement, mais c'est considéré comme la première république dans son genre. C'est ce que j'ai essayé de le dire, en tout cas en anglais. Donc oui, si ça répond à ta question, est-ce que c'est le cas? Oui, c'est clairement le cas. Et donc, il est aussi le premier à donc présenter ce genre de gouvernement, entre guillemets, moderne, y compris dans une zone rurale, qui n'a pas du tout été préparée pour ce genre de réforme drastique. Donc c'est exceptionnel, non seulement pour l'Afrique du Nord, pour l'Afrique de manière générale et pour le monde en entier. Le monde en entier. Et il est considéré aussi, pour ça il est estimé par... la communauté internationale à l'époque aussi, donc il y a pas mal de textes qui renvoient à ça. Il y a très peu qui a été publié en sciences. Il y a quand même quelques essais. Anecdotiquement, on renvoie à ça, qu'il faudrait quand même voir les choses telles qu'elles sont et de façon... contextualisé dans leur contexte, il a été exceptionnel. Donc non seulement en tant que Mjahid, résistant, dans le guerrier de résistance, mais en tant que réformateur. Alors, les autres questions sont très compliquées, mais c'est vrai. Donc, il y a beaucoup de choses à dire là-dessus. Donc, où est le berbère, la place du berbère? Alors, au départ, c'était dans le programme, mais en ayant choisi pour le pan-arabisme, le pan, c'est clair. Donc c'est pour ça qu'il a été aussi le précurseur du nationalisme marocain, du nationalisme nord-africain, un des éléments les plus importants. Donc ceux qui les voient contre en fait tout ce qui est Khattabi est très focalisé sur l'amazir dans son... en fait, ne donnant pas droit au contexte historique et ne tenant pas compte de l'histoire derrière, en fait, cette narrative. Il voit même un traître. Pourquoi ne pas avoir défendu le Tamazigh à l'époque? C'est pas possible. C'était pas possible. Et là, c'est tout un autre discours, mais je dirais, on pourrait en parler. Et ça, je mettrai certainement dans mon texte. Afin de construire une identité, il aurait dû. Mais en fait, afin de justifier, légitimer cet État-nation, cette nouvelle nation, il fallait des symboles identitaires, politiques, idéologiques très, très forts. Et l'arabo-islamisme, à l'époque, était le courant international le plus soutenu. Donc, il a fait ses choix au détriment de Tamazigh, des langues en fait locales ou de la langue locale ancestrale. Et à mon avis, l'exclure n'a pas été le bon choix, je crois, à la fin, parce qu'il a perdu aussi des voix locales. Rifen. Et j'ai aussi des témoignages de ça. Donc c'est un discours complexe et je crois qu'il faudrait quand même que j'applique les mêmes règles que j'ai appliquées aux autres et qu'il faudrait que je vous remercie beaucoup pour votre patience, pour votre intérêt, et perhaps Eileen and I could say two things to close up this, or I can say one thing to close up this session, and then we will see each other. Yeah. Okay.
This session?
Yes, this session.
Well, it's not profoundly political instantly, but the fact is, I mean, this leads me to ask, where is the biography? Is the biography your presentation? Is the biography the film? Is the biography a biography because this person has been legendized? I mean, he's a legend, and it's a legend that works for this community. So it really, for me, it really renders a great deal of complexity around this theme, which I think is important and exciting. And I think it would be interesting to see that also in relationship to the film on Semben. So, I mean, that's what I have to say for the moment. I really wonder, where is a legend separate from a biography? Does the fact that he becomes legendary make the biography? I think there are many important questions.
Yes.
So that's what I want.
There's a very important question. I would like to discuss it with you during our stay here, because you have the facts and then you have the narratives about the facts.
Right.
And that's, we could discuss it.
Okay.
We'll be back at 2:45 when the third and final session is scheduled to begin. Now all those who come to share lunch, come with me. The restaurant is the same like yesterday.